Today is Topics Tuesday, which means we are going to be diving back into our topic that is Russia-Ukraine war. Now, where we left off last week, it's your Uncle Adam's birthday. Happy birthday, Uncle Adams. Okay. We should stay on schedule, though. This stream late? No. I know. It's horrible. So, let's get into it. So where we left off last time, we had gone through the history of the United States building up neo-Nazi movements from Ukraine here in the USA and in Ukraine still abroad. We also talked about the United States getting involved in the 2004 Orange Revolution in Ukraine, which was one of the first times in recent history we tried to steal an election in Ukraine and the aftermath of that. And how following that, we ended up investing a lot of money in Ukraine to continue pushing anti-Russian narratives and pro-Western propaganda. And we ended with a testimony before the House International Relations Committee Subcommittee on Europe about Ukraine's future and U.S. interests, wherein the U.S. government said, we want to do business in Ukraine. And to do business in Ukraine, we got to get Ukrainians to hate Russians and like us. So, that's what's going on. So this is what's going on. We as in the U.S. Yes, I'm an American, so sorry. This is all my tax dollars, what my tax dollars do with my money. The ultimate, actually being an American is the ultimate lib rebuttal, because when people are like, how dare you say what should go on in my country? I'm like, well, my tax dollars are being spent there, so I get a say too. Of course, we all get a say in everything that happens in the world politically, no matter what, but, it kind of shuts them up. So, today we're going to get into the issue of NATO. Now, I know if you're in this stream, odds are you probably know a lot about NATO, but there's some people who might be new. So we're just going to start with a little overview of what NATO is very, very quickly. Did we already do the NATO thing? Wait, did we do NATO already last week? I think we might have done NATO last week. We did. Okay, so we already did NATO. So just to recap, the NATO content isn't last week. Didn't we do NATO? We did. We did. Okay. So we did talk about NATO already. We got further than I thought. I was worried we didn't. Okay. So Europe and Ukraine, you were 8 for Euromaidan. You had no idea how much the U.S. fucked with your opinions. Exactly. So if you're under the age of 35 and you grew up in Ukraine, one of the most shocking things you will probably see is the 2009 Pew Research poll showing that the majority of Ukrainians in 2009 had a favorable view of Russia in their country. Right? That's like, wait, what? And the shift in that public opinion was literally purchased by the United States. Yeah, we did that. It is interesting. So yes, okay, so we did do NATO. So we talked about what NATO was then, and we talked about all of the promises. I do remember this from NATO Watch. All the different people that were assured and assuring Russia that they would not expand NATO, NATO continuing to expand anyway, and Russia being very explicitly clear, going back to the 90s, but even reiterating as early as 2011, I remember this now, that if NATO expanded to Ukraine, first of all, Russia would have no choice but to take that as an act of war-like aggression, like you want to start a war with us because what are you doing? And also, furthermore, that it would create civil unrest in Ukraine because such a large percent of Ukrainians still did align with Russia and would not want to join NATO. So that's where we left off. Russia was like, hey, if you do this, not only will it basically what it will do is it will divide Ukraine. It will create civil conflict in Ukraine. It will create a civil war in Ukraine. And the ethnic Russians in Ukraine will demand our involvement. And we will get involved. And then it will start a war between Ukraine and Russia. And we want to avoid that. Could you not do that? Could you just please not try to do NATO in Ukraine? That is what Russia explicitly said would happen. And we now know is exactly what occurred. So that is where we left off. Okay. Getting into Euromaidan. Now, I have this article that we're going to start with from my problematic fave lib.org for news, The Guardian. What is this? Okay, yeah. So this is an editorial more than 12 years old that says, in Ukraine, the U.S. is dragging us towards war with Russia. Washington's role in Ukraine and its backing for the regime's neo-Nazis has huge implications for the rest of the world. Now, this is wild because we are used to only hearing about communist places or our political enemies being called regimes. But this guy's out here like, no, there's a regime in Ukraine right now, and the regime is full of neo-Nazis explicitly. Why do we tolerate the threat of another world war in our name? And he's speaking from Ukraine, right? And he says, why do we allow lies that justify this risk? The scale of our indoctrination, wrote Harold Pinter, is a brilliant, even witty, highly successful act of hypnosis, as if the truth never happened, even while it was happening. Every year, the American historian William Blum publishes his updated summary of the record of U.S. foreign policy, which shows that since 1945, the U.S. has tried to overthrow more than 50 governments, many of them democratically elected, grossly interfered in elections in 30 countries, bombed the civilian populations of 30 countries, used chemical and biological weapons, and attempted to assassinate foreign leaders. In many cases, Britain has been a collaborator. The degree of human suffering, let alone criminality, is little acknowledged in the West, despite the presence of the world's most advanced communications and nominally most free journalism. That the most numerous victims of terrorism, our terrorism, are Muslims is unsayable. That extreme jihadism, which led to 9/11, was nurtured as a weapon of Anglo-American policy, Operation Cyclone in Afghanistan, is suppressed. In April, the U.S. State Department noted that following NATO's campaign in 2011, quote, Libya has become a terrorist safe haven. So we've got some general intro anti-imperialist bangers getting dropped by this guy, right? Pretty good. The name of our enemy has changed over the years. And by our, he's clearly talking about Western white people, right? From communism to Islamism. But generally, it is any society independent of Western power and occupying strategically useful or resource-rich territory, or merely offering an alternative to U.S. domination. The leaders of these obstructive nations are usually violently shoved aside, such as the Democrats Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran, Arbenz in Guatemala, Salvador Allende in Chile, or they are murdered, like Patrice Lumumba in the DRC. All are subjected to a Western media campaign of vilification. Think Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, and now Vladimir Putin. Washington's role in Ukraine is different only in its implications for the rest of us. For the first time since the Reagan years, the U.S. is threatening to take the world to war. With Eastern Europe and the Balkans now military outposts of NATO, the last buffer state bordering Russia, Ukraine, is being torn apart by fascist forces unleashed by the U.S. and the EU. We in the West are now backing neo-Nazis in a country where Ukrainian Nazis backed Hitler. Having masterminded the coup in February against the democratically elected government in Kiev, Washington's planned seizure of Russia's historic, legitimate warm water naval base in Crimea failed. The Russians defended themselves, as they have done against every threat and invasion from the West for almost a century. But NATO's military encirclement has accelerated, along with U.S.-orchestrated attacks on ethnic Russians in Ukraine. If Putin can be provoked into coming to their aid, his preordained pariah role will justify a NATO-run guerrilla war that is likely to spill into Russia itself. Now remember, this article's 11 years old, right? 11? 12 years old. 12 years old. This happened. This is exactly what happened. Instead, Putin has confounded the war party by seeking an accommodation with Washington and the EU, by withdrawing Russian troops from the Ukrainian border and urging ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine to abandon the weekend's provocative referendum. So remember what's happening here. We're going to get into more details about it, right? But basically, the Russian ethnic population in Ukraine was not happy with NATO expansion in Ukraine, just as Putin said they would not be. They did not want to become a vassal state of the West. We're going to get into exactly what happened with Euromaidan. This is a primer. We'll get into what occurred, but basically a coup occurred and the pro-Western forces seized control of the country. And then the people who were being terrorized by them, ethnic Russians, wanted to leave. They wanted to leave, right? And so that's what's being talked about here. So this is a little bit of a jump ahead, but I want to get everybody in the right state of mind to understand Euromaidan before we get into the details of Euromaidan. These Russian-speaking and bilingual people, a third of Ukraine's population, have long sought a democratic federation that reflects the country's ethnic diversity and is autonomous of Kiev and independent of Moscow. Most are neither separatists nor rebels, as the Western media calls them, but citizens who want to live securely in their homeland. So we're talking about, in the Donbas region, the move for independence that was going on here at this time. And again, if all of this doesn't quite make sense to you, that's okay. We'll read more after this that will make it all crystal clear. Okay? So, like the ruins of Iraq and Afghanistan, Ukraine has been turned into a CIA theme park, run personally by CIA Director John Brennan in Kiev, with dozens of special units from the CIA and FBI setting up a security structure that oversees savage attacks on those who opposed the February coup, which we're going to get into. Watch the videos, read the eyewitness reports from the massacre in Odessa this month, which we'll talk about. Bust fascist thugs burned the trade union headquarters, killing 41 people trapped inside. Watch the police standing by. A doctor described trying to rescue people. Quote, "But I was stopped by pro-Ukrainian Nazi radicals. One of them pushed me away rudely, promising that soon me and other Jews of Odessa are going to meet the same fate. What occurred yesterday didn't even take place during the fascist occupation in my town during World War II. I wonder why the whole world is keeping silent." Russian-speaking Ukrainians are fighting for survival. When Putin announced the withdrawal of Russian troops from the border, the Kiev junta's defense secretary, Andriy Parubiy, founding member of the fascist Svoboda party, boasted that attacks on insurgents would continue. In Orwellian-style, propaganda in the West has inverted this to Moscow, quote, "trying to orchestrate conflict and provocation," according to William Hague. His cynicism is matched by Obama's grotesque congratulations to the coup junta on its remarkable restraint after the Odessa massacre. The junta, says Obama, is duly elected. As Henry Kissinger once said, "It is not a matter of what is true that counts, but what is perceived to be true." In the U.S. media, the Odessa atrocity has been played down as murky and a tragedy in which nationalists, neo-Nazis, attacked separatists, people collecting signatures for a referendum on a federal Ukraine. Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal damned the victims. Deadly Ukraine fire likely sparked by rebels, government says. Propaganda in Germany has been pure Cold War, with the Frankfurter Zeitung warning its readers of Russia's undeclared war. For the Germans, it's a poignant irony that Putin is the only leader to condemn the rise of fascism in 21st century Europe. A popular truism is that the world changed following 9/11, but what has changed? According to the great whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg, a silent coup has taken place in Washington. Rampant militarism now rules. The Pentagon currently runs special operations, secret wars, in 124 countries. At home, rising poverty and a loss of liberty are the historic corollary of a perpetual war state. Add the risk of nuclear war, and the question is, why do we tolerate this? Okay, so this is, pronunciation with Madeline. So this is, so next time somebody tells you I can't pronounce Kamala Harris's name because I'm a racist who hates black Democrats, I tell them, don't worry, I can't pronounce shit in German either. All right, so this is what's going on here. Odessa, Ukraine. So this is just an overview of what we can expect as we learn about this 2013-2014 coup. Now, the next sources that we use are going to be from a variety of different political perspectives. We're going to have next a left-wing perspective. That's going to be a socialist perspective, and that's going to be from Liberation News, our PSL comrades out here in the USA. Then we are going to have a right-wing perspective from Responsible Statecraft talking about the war. And these are both American news sources, right? A left-wing American news source and a right-wing American news source. And then we are going to have a black perspective from the Black Agenda Report. When did the Ukraine war begin? And then we are going to have I'm going to call it a centrist. You might call it left if you're an American, but the Jacobin, which, they're pretty dumb soaky. They're not. I think they're pretty centrist. But we're going to have them a perspective on it as well. And then we're going to have another centrist perspective from the Brookings, center-right perspective from Brookings.edu. We'll call Jacobin center-left and Brookings center-right. We'll call Responsible Statecraft far-right, and we'll call Liberation News far-left. So we're going to run the whole gamut. And these are all going to be American. Jacobin's not American, actually. So most of them are going to be American sources, though. So these are not Russian sources of any kind. And we also have some video footage of Euromaidan that we'll play a little bit of, but I'm going to encourage you guys to watch this on your own. It's very, very long, and we won't have time to get through all of it. Centrist or moderate? Shit, I don't know. Good question. Good question. Okay. So we're going to start with the left-wing political perspective on this. And this is from Liberation News. And this is from 2022, when later on the war broke out. And so what they do in this is they go back and they look at Euromaidan and they talk about the conditions that would later lead to the war emerging. So on February 24th, Russian President Vladimir Putin, 2022, we're jumping ahead, undertook what he referred to as a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Western bourgeois media immediately decried these stated goals, regularly repeating that the allegations of Nazism in Ukraine are nothing more than Russian fake news. Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, went so far as to flatly state, quote, "There are no Nazis in the Ukraine." He said the Ukraine also. Uh-oh. Not great. Similar claims resound throughout the mass media's echo chambers, and the fact that the current president of Ukraine is Jewish is often short-sightedly presented as the only proof necessary, just like we solved racism in the United States when we elected Barack Obama. Thank you. We did it. We fixed it. Disputing the existence of Nazis and fascists in Ukraine serves the purpose of constructing a twisted but simplistic narrative loosely based on World War II. Putin is an evil, Hitler-like figure intent on attacking the freedom-loving Ukrainian government and its innocent supporters. The goal of such a narrative is to foster blind and unquestioning support for the Zelensky government, NATO, and the imperialist Western powers. A humanitarian war, meaning a brutal NATO intervention that will likely spark World War III, is thereby presented as a viable option. In this context, any attempt to provide a sober and concrete analysis of the actual history of Nazism in the region runs the risk of being disingenuously labeled and dismissed as pro-Putin because it does not support this warmongering narrative. But an examination that accounts for the complexities in concrete situations reveals that there is indeed a deep and expansive history of fascism in Ukraine, which has been aided and abetted by the US government. This does not, however, mean that fascism is necessarily the dominant force in the country, or even in every domain in which it exists, the military, paramilitary forces, the parliament, society at large, etc. Moreover, it does not imply in the least that one has to support Russia's invasion or even assume that denazification is the primary goal. I happen to think that it's probably not the goal. I think NATO expansion was the primary issue. But, that's their claim. So, yes. On the contrary, it is possible to understand that fascism is a very real force in Ukraine while opposing Putin's decision to deploy troops. So, this is a Marxist-Leninist org out here in the United States, right? I tend to take the position as a Marxist-Leninist. Invasion, not ideal. War, bad, right? War, bad. Oh, hi, Kobashi. But also, to be fair, if you ask me what I would have done in Russia's position, I don't know. And that's usually what I tell people, right? Thank God I'm not in charge of Russia, because I don't know what I would have done. So, a brief history of Nazis, NATO, and Ukraine. To understand the current conflict, it is important to recall that Russians and Ukrainians once lived in relative harmony when they were both part of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, which is founded on the principle of the self-determination of nations. This was violently interrupted in 1941 when the Nazis invaded the USSR, taking over much of Ukraine. According to Jean-Paul Himka, a quarter of all victims of the Holocaust lived in Ukraine, and Ukrainian ultranationalists collaborated with the Nazis in carrying out their horrendous deeds. The Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the OUN, and its armed forces, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, the UPA, which we talked about this in last week's episode with the guy who wrote the book about the Nazi collaboration in the United States, participated in this genocidal rampage. OUN militias were key actors in the anti-Jewish violence of summer of 1941. OUN recruited for and infiltrated police formations that provided indispensable manpower for the Germans' mobile killing units, and in 1943, thousands of these policemen deserted from German service to join the OUN-led nationalist insurgency, during which UPA killed Jews who had managed to survive the major liquidations of 1942. That's a quote from him. According to Ian Sayer and Douglas Botting, the OUN played a significant part in the extermination of the Jews and other undesirables, often performing the dirty work of the German Einsatzkommando extermination squads. The killing of children is what you need to know about that. And continued after the war under American sponsorship. Now, something I'm going to point out is that this was written in 2022. After 2022, we will see that a lot of the average people in Ukraine did get more Nazi sympathetic. They literally, there was a TV presenter who showed up on a screen with Eichmann behind them and was like, you know what? If you want to call me a Nazi, maybe I'm a Nazi. Maybe they were right and we should kill all the Russian children so they don't turn into Russian adults. Just very, very wild stuff, okay? So, that's what's going on. Indeed, in the post-war era, the U.S. government discreetly integrated an alarming number of Nazi collaborators into a veritable international network of anti-communist fascists. By 1952, John Loftus estimates that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of important Nazi collaborators from Belarus, the Ukraine, the Baltic states, and the Balkans who had been brought to the United States, and many more had been operationalized around the world. Now, remember, that's also what we talked about with the interview we read with the author Russ Bellant, and further reading on his book explains all of that in details. We read the interview with him, but you can read the whole book, and there's a link to where you can view the book for free online. The U.S. Counterintelligence Corps ran an Operation Anyface to protect the fascist leader of the OUN, the renowned Nazi collaborator Stepan Bandera, from being brought to justice by the Soviets. Remember Bandera. You remember him from last week too. This is the guy's name who's going to come up over and over and over again because he's the guy that the current right wing in Ukraine idolizes. Bandera's chief of National Security Service, Mykola Lebed, was the highest-ranking Ukrainian Nazi to ever enter the United States. CIA Covert Operations Chief Frank Wisner admitted in 1951 there were at least 20 former or active members of the SB of OUN Bandera in the United States, so OUNB. The U.S. intelligence services worked closely with several organizations informing Nazi collaborators like these in order to run extensive sabotage, terror, and assassination campaigns against the USSR. In 1951, Weisner estimated that over 35,000 members of the Russian secret police have been killed by OUN-UPA since the end of the last war. NATO was deeply involved in this anti-communist war, as demonstrated perhaps most clearly by Operation Gladio. Overseen by the CIA and MI6, NATO established a large secret army of trained militants, many of whom were well-established Nazis and fascists. According to the official Italian Senate investigation into Gladio, quote, it emerges without the shadow of doubt that elements of the CIA started in the second half of the 1960s a massive operation in order to counter by the use of all means of the spreading of groups and movements on the left on a European level. Sorry, the wording of that was very, Italian to me. It wasn't like a normal American sentence cadence. It was challenging. This included targeted killings and false flag terrorist attacks that were blamed on communists in order to terrify the civilian population into supporting right-wing governments in anti-communist raids. So just really hammering that home. The United States government, the CIA, along with MI6, for all our Brits in the chat, did targeted killings and false flag terrorist attacks, then blamed them on communists to terrify the civilian population into supporting right-wing politics. All right? And this is what we say. You really think they're lying about how many people communists have killed? Yes, we know they have a history of lying about who communists have supposedly killed in order to convince and trick you all to support right-wing governments so they can make money. That's it, right? That's it. So, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe of NATO from 1963 to 1969 was Lyman Lemnitzer, who had given the green light to Operation Northwoods in 1962. This operation, which was never implemented because President JFK refused to sign off on it, consisted of planning false flag terrorist attacks against U.S. citizens in Miami that would later be blamed on Cuba in order to justify a military invasion of their land. Lemnitzer's tenure overlapped with Adolf Husinger's, one of the many high-ranking Nazi and fascist officials who had been integrated into the U.S. military and intelligence networks. Husinger served as Hitler's chief of the general staff of the army and later became chairman of the NATO Military Committee, which is wild. NATO has all these ties with Hitler and Nazi Germany. NATO did not content itself then with having Nazis do some of its dirty work by recruiting them into its secret armies to run heinous anti-communist terror campaigns. It also integrated them directly into its leadership, thereby sending a clear message to the world regarding its political orientation. So NATO had a bunch of Nazis in it, is what we're saying, right? So that brings us to the Maidan coup, which is the topic we're talking about really today. And a lot of people we talk to will be like, it wasn't a coup. It wasn't a coup. It was a revolution. Anybody with half a brain cell knows this was a coup. All right. Timoshenko, a Ukrainian politician who was not affiliated with either side involved in this fight, was like, holy shit, our country just got couped. Everybody with a brain cell knows this is a coup. People trying to argue this is not a coup is just insane to me in a matter of semantics. So, in the ensuing years, Virgo's here. The United States continued to work with Ukrainian fascists in their endless destabilization campaigns against the USSR. According to CIA specialist Douglas Valentine, the CIA has been developing fascist assets in Ukraine for 70 years. The Maidan coup in late 2013-2014, which was openly supported by the imperial powers in the United States and Europe, relied on far-right shock troops such as the fascist organization Right Sector and the ultranationalist Svoboda Party to overthrow the elected government of Viktor Yanukovych. 3 members of Svoboda were installed as members of the first post-coup government, and the co-founder of Svoboda, Andrei Parubi, was parliamentary speaker for 5 years. Although Svoboda had since attempted to mollify its Nazi image, it maintains its substance as an ultra-nationalist anti-communist party that openly praises Nazi collaborator Stepan Bandera, the politician and theorist of the military wing of the fascist OUN. Yeah, they're better people than me, because I don't call him a collaborator, I call him a Nazi. Because he helped a bunch of Nazis come to Ukraine, and murder ethnic minorities. That guy's a Nazi, right? But you know, they're better than me. They're doing their due diligence. They're calling him a Nazi collaborator. So the Azov Battalion was formed in May 2014 out of the Ultranationalist Patriot of Ukraine, founded in 2005, and the Social National Assembly, or SNA, founded in 2008, that is, quote, known to have carried out attacks on minority groups. So, just to recap for anybody who's like, who are all these people? What's going on? So there was a coup that happened in 2013-2014 in Ukraine that we're going to talk about today. That's our focus today. Here's the overview of it. The United States and Europe supported this coup. The coup was led by far right-wing groups, Right Sector, Svoboda, and they had members of them that were affiliated with neo-Nazi militias in Ukraine who were following in the footsteps of the OUN, the OUNB, Stepan Bandera of the past and looking up to him, all right? So they came together these weren't the only people, but they were heavily involved in it, and they did a coup that the United States and Europe backed to overthrow the government there. The new post-coup government had a number of these far right people in the government in high-ranking positions. And they later came under fire, especially by Europe, for how blatant their Nazi iconography was. They tried to tone it down, but they still are ultra-nationalist, anti-communist party. Now, a lot of people tell you, well, they only got 2% of the popular vote. These are literal Nazis. And I'm sorry, I think 2% of the popular vote is pretty wild. 1 in 50 people in your country walking around going, yeah, I voted for Hitler. They're not like crypto Nazis. It's not like MAGA where they don't know they're Nazis. They know they're Nazis. So I think 1 in 50 people in your country voting for a Nazi is pretty significant and worth talking about. I think that's big, right? I think that's big. So, you know what I mean? 1 in 50. Oh, sorry, 1 in 50. Thank you. 2 in 100, 1 in 50. Thank you. Just running my mouth. What are numbers? Yeah, 1 in 50. Thank you for that. So, I think that's significant. I think 1 in 50 is a lot of people. I think that's a lot of people, right? You walk into a room with 50 people, you know there's a Nazi in there. That's crazy to me. Right? That'd be like every show you ever went to, like every punk show, every DIY show, there's at least one Nazi there. Now imagine what has happened anytime if you've been in a DIY scene, one Nazi has shown up to a show, what a crisis it is, right? Now imagine that's every show forever. That's a lot. And MAGA's only crypto to themselves. Yeah, they're living in a state of delusion. These people don't even have the delusion. They're just like, I love being a Nazi. Great. Yeah, that's what they're doing. So, okay. Yeah, only 1 in 50 of these grains of rice are poisoned. Why aren't you eating? Yeah, exactly. Come on. So, it's a lot. It's a lot of people. But again, it's not the majority of people. And, why is it important to note that it's not the majority of people? Because a lot of people in Ukraine, we'll see, ended up getting severely fucked over by this new government. And so, we know that, right? The Azov Battalion was formed in May of 2014 out of the ultra-nationalist Patriot of Ukraine, founded in 2005. We talked about this. Okay. The Azov Battalion is this paramilitary group that's known to have carried out attacks on minority groups, right? So the Azov Battalion, Right Sector, and other fascist militias played a key role in consolidating power for the post-coup government in numerous ways. They engaged in street violence against the left. They ran intimidation campaigns against uncooperative politicians. They set up indoctrination camps for children and youth, and they exerted pressure on the government to revise the education curriculum, ban the Russian language, and rewrite official state history. Why? To honor that guy, Stepan Bandera. The post-coup period of street violence and intimidation culminated in what some have called the worst Nazi atrocity since World War II, when 42 leftists perished in an inferno set by fascists in the Odessa Trade Union building. So this is what the post-Maidan coup government of Ukraine was doing. So when you see people out there who are like, I'm a leftist, I support Ukraine, well, the Ukrainian government would kill you. They would kill you. Right? And there's not even political utility in supporting this group. I know they say the same thing about Iran. The Iranian government killed communists. Yes, we understand that. But if you are talking about Ukraine and you don't have the political complexity to be like, the Ukrainian government murdered people for being socialists, for being leftists, what kind of conversation are you even engaging in, right? I think they ended up banning all, even somewhat leftist parties. Right, exactly. So these are the types of conversations that liberals are incapable of having. They're not capable of having. The ultimate irony is they're the ones who are always yelling, nuance, 2 things can be true at once. They have no nuance, though. They are mad at other people for having nuance. When you look at this and you're like, all of these things are true. They're like, so you're obsessed with Russia, because they're not capable of engaging in a political conversation that doesn't reduce itself to a good guy and a bad guy, right? That makes them look good or bad to support. So the U.S.-backed regime change operation is what prompted the outbreak of civil war in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. When pro-Russian separatists declared their independence from the fascist Ukrainian puppet government, it was unable to contain them. So the Azov Battalion and other fascist militias were unleashed, leading to the death of some 14,000 people. Just before the 2022 invasion, Putin recognized the independence of the 2 regions of the Donbas. Azov received backing from Ukraine's Interior Minister Arsen Avakov, as well as U.S. arms and training. So the United States took this Nazi battalion and we gave them weapons and we gave them training and we unleashed them in Ukraine. Due to its purported effectiveness in fighting Russian separatists, the battalion was integrated into the Ukrainian National Guard in 2014, formally becoming part of the state. So the fascist neo-Nazi Stepan Bandera worshipping militia group became an official part of the Ukrainian state in 2014, shortly after the coup. In 2015, the CIA, according to 5 former intelligence and national security officials, set up a secret intensive training program in the U.S. for elite Ukrainian special operation forces and other intelligence personnel. In the same year, U.S. Congress passed a spending bill that featured hundreds of millions of dollars worth of economic and military support for Ukraine, one that was expressly modified to allow that support to flow to the country's resident neo-Nazi militia, the Azov Regiment. So here's the Azov Regiment. Sorry. I can't cover it for you. Sorry. There you go. Just so you know. All right. Just so we know. We saw it. We know. Okay. Since there has been some debate regarding just how Nazi the Azov or other ultra-nationalist militias are, it is worth noting that the U.S. House of Representatives acknowledged in 2015 that Azov is neo-Nazi. Although the battalion has sometimes denied that it adheres to Nazi ideology as a whole, quote, Nazi symbols such as the swastika and SS regalia are rife on the uniforms and bodies of Azov members. Their uniforms carry the neo-Nazi Wolfsangel symbol, which looks like a black swastika on a yellow background. Andriy Dyachenko, the spokesperson for the regiment in 2015, claimed that 10 to 20% of the group's members are Nazis. It appears he made the statement in order to downplay fears of Nazification. However, even if the numbers are that low, it necessarily follows that all of the other members of the Azov battalion are Nazi collaborators. Again, those are Nazis. What's the thing? If you see 10 Nazis sitting at a table with one guy, how many Nazis are at the table? Or it's the other way. If you see a Nazi sitting at a table with 10 guys, how many Nazis are at that table? 11, right? Come on. These are Nazis. These are Nazis. Yeah, the liberals, so for the Iran thing, let me see if I can find this really fast. Liberals do like to point this out. It's not anything recent or anything like that. It's, hold on. Where's the actual story about this? It was shortly after the revolution. I'm trying to find a story for you guys. It was like, basically after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, there was a civil, unrest, a vacuum emerged for who would be powerful. And so, some communists were killed in the 1980s. It was a long time ago. Here's an article from Marxist.org. Here we go. If you guys want to read up more about that. Here we go. The following is a text of a leaflet distributed by in Tehran by the Union of Iranian Communists. The leaflet was released on the anniversary of the death of the first martyrs on November 9th and November 13th of 1981. These martyrs were killed in the course of several battles that preceded the uprising in Amal in January of 1982. So this was just basically in the conflict. It's 1979. The Iranian Revolution happened. They expelled the American forces. And then there was people trying to figure out civil unrest, basically civil war. Who should be in charge? And the people who ultimately won, they did kill communists in this. And so, but liberals will bring this up, why do you even like the current Iranian government? They killed communists. Yes, they did. That's true. And we acknowledge that. In 1981, 1982, in the process of civil war emerging after this unrest, communists were vying for political power, as they should, in Iran, and they were defeated by an opposing force that later would become the Iranian government we know today. We don't love that. We don't think that's great, right? We understand the Iranian government today is not communist. However, our conversations about Iran include that. They also include conversations about Iran's role in anti-imperial work in the region. We include that in conversations and understanding about what Iran has done for Palestine, what it means for Iran to have sovereignty in that region. And this is why we say if communists in Iran think now is the right time for them to have a worker party and overthrow their government, that overthrows their government, and they have a worker revolution and they want to go communist, we would obviously support that. We understand the current government is not communist. However, our understanding of Iran is not reduced to a good guy, bad guy. It's taking them into account in a complex geopolitical scenario, the same way we take Russia into account that same way. We know Iran and Russia are not Marxist-Leninist countries. We do know there's more Marxist-Leninist influence in Russia now because of the Marxist-Leninists being the second largest political party there, and we support that. But we're able to understand these things and say that even though this happened, this does not mean we think that Iran deserves to lose its sovereignty, right? That we deny the work that Iran does in defending Palestinian sovereignty. These things, right? Yes, we aren't liberals. We don't center ourselves in the revolutions of other countries. Exactly. So this is something you guys can read. I'll give you the link on this if you want to learn more about it. It is used by by liberals as a gotcha a lot of the time. It is also sometimes used by Iranian communists to describe why they personally oppose the current government of Iran, which they are well within their right to do, right? They are well within their right to oppose that government and say, I don't like this government and I want to work a government. And obviously we would support that. We would support that happening. Sorry. Dropped internet, everything. Oh, there it is. It's back. We're back. Okay. Frozen. Yeah, it was frozen. Sorry. Okay, so here's the tiny roll I'm going to give you guys, not to get us too far off course, so you can learn more about this. So these were, again, 1981, 1982. Sorry, wolf single jump scare. Oh, you didn't see it. Good. Haha. I didn't have that screen up. Yeah, try refreshing. It should be back now. Malrich says, the only thing that's surprising from historical framework of the revolution of the IRGC is that they weren't and aren't puppets supported by imperial powers. That's why it's anti-imperial to support the IRGC, critically supporting when they aren't being bombed by the empire. Yeah, I mean, exactly. And that's the thing. Liberals, for all of their two things can be true at once, blah, 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 blah. They only say that when one thing is demonstrably not true. They don't say it when two things actually are true, right? It is true that the Iranian government, in the post-revolutionary skirmishes for power, viewed communists as their opposition, and they fought each other and they killed them, right? That is true. We know that, yes. Communists tried to do a revolution and it didn't work, and it is sad, and we are very, very disappointed that that country was not ready for that yet. However, none of that takes away from the fact that the current Iranian government is doing more to defend Palestinian sovereignty and liberation than arguably anybody else on the planet, right? So, okay. All right, so getting back into this. So over back in Ukraine, we've got the neo-Nazis, the Nazis from the Azov battalion running around. They've got swastikas all over them. They've got the wolf single symbol everywhere. They're saying, oh, only 10 to 20% of us are actually Nazis. You know, I'm like, hey, I think that means the rest of you are Nazis too. Regardless of whether or not Azov or similar battalions accept 100% of Nazi ideology, it is essential to recognize that their overall orientation is clearly fascist. Okay, hold on. Scroll up. I don't like to show the symbols for long if I can avoid it. Okay. They receive funding from reactionary elements of the capitalist ruling class to run violent parastate militias, which in some cases have been integrated into the state, that are ultra-nationalist, racist, pro-capitalist, and anti-communist. Andrei Belitsky is well positioned to understand their orientation because he served as a leader of the Patriot of Ukraine and the SNA, as well as the Azov Battalion, before serving as a member of the Ukrainian parliament from 2014 to 2019. In an interview, he explained his position as follows. The historic mission of our nation is this critical moment to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade for their survival. A crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen, inferior races according to the standard Nazi terminology. So in case there was any question, the leader of the Patriot of Ukraine, the leader of the Azov Battalion, and a member of Ukrainian parliament for 5 years, said the historic mission of our nation, Ukraine, is to lead the white races in the world in a crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen. So, I just want to, for anybody to be like, there's not a Nazi problem in Ukraine. I'm like, what? The guy said there was a Semite-led Untermenschen and it was the goal of the white races in Ukraine to defeat them. He was in parliament. That's crazy. So, fascism today in Ukraine. Again, this is from 2022. It's a little outdated. But we'll read it because it's a good headspace for us all to be in. In Ukraine today, fascist elements are present in the capitalist ruling class, paramilitary organizations, the Ukrainian military, the parliament, and certain sectors of society. While it would be actual jump scare, a mistake to assume they are in each case the dominant force, it would be equally erroneous to ignore their presence, extensive reach, and support they enjoy from the Zelensky government and imperialist forces outside the country. In the 2019 parliamentary elections, Svoboda formed a united party list with other far-right parties, Right Sector, National Court, and the Government Initiative of Yurosh. They only obtained 2.15% of the votes, not surpassing the 5% threshold for a parliamentary seat. In the same election, Volodymyr Zelensky's Servant of the People Party, which ran on an anti-corruption platform and is described as centrist in the mainstream press, won 124 seats on the nationwide party list and 130 constituency seats. Zelensky's party is named after the eponymous hit Ukrainian TV series that appealed to Ukrainians frustrated with the country's oligarchic elite and the failure to drain the swamp after the country's 2014 revolution. In the series, Zelensky, a career actor and comedian, played the role of none other than President of Ukraine. His meteoric rise to the actual presidency was thus due in no small part to his celebrity status as a famous actor, not unlike other political puppets in bourgeois democracies. Right? It's a little Reagan, Trump here in the United States. Moreover, he received ample funding from a handful of private donors, including most notably the billionaire oligarch Ihor Kolomoisky, who was his single biggest supporter. Kolomoisky owns an ownership stake in One and One Media Group, whose TV station carried Servant of the People, which retrospectively looked a lot like an extended campaign advertisement. His media outlet also provided security and logistical backup for the actor's political campaign, during which time he traveled 14 times to Geneva and Tel Aviv, where Kolomoisky is based. He's an Israeli billionaire. David makes me say Israeli-Ukrainian billionaire. He's an Israeli-Ukrainian billionaire. Yeah, Aaron and Hal. Yeah. Zelensky had no political background. He was literally just an actor who played a president on TV, on a TV station that was owned by a Ukrainian-Israeli billionaire who then bankrolled his entire actual presidential campaign. Yes. The Pandora Papers revealed a spiderweb of offshore networks and financial entanglements between Zelensky and Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky is, moreover, one of the major funders of the ultra-nationalist militias in eastern Ukraine, including the fascist Azov and Aidar battalions, who have been accused of heinous war crimes in the Donbas region over the past 8 years. Now, when people are like, how can Ukraine have a Nazi problem? Their president's Jewish. Okay, and an Israeli billionaire is literally funding the Azov battalion, who are known Nazis. So maybe that's not, maybe for capital, when money's involved, how Jewish somebody is isn't exactly the most important part. Yeah, he's Ukrainian Jon Stewart, exactly. There's a hype train going. So Kolomoisky funded all these things. He also allegedly funds the Donbas, Dnieper 1 and Dnieper 2 volunteer battalions. He was appointed governor of his home state in March 2014, and he was instrumental in crushing the separatist movement there by spending more than $10 million to create the Dnipro battalion. In 2015, it was estimated there were some 30 nationalist militias fighting separatists in eastern Ukraine, financially supported by wealthy oligarchs like Kolomoisky and Taruda, the billionaire governor of the Donetsk region, who also funded the Azov battalion. They function as a powerful paramilitary force that supplements the Ukrainian military. In July of 2015, Russia issued a warrant for Kolomoisky's arrest for organizing the killing of civilians due to his financial support of the militants, which is true, that happened. Let's play this 19-second clip for the chat. Is it the penis? Is it the penis? Yes, it's the penis. This is the president of Ukraine. He's definitely not a puppet for Western interests, guys. He's definitely not a puppet for Western interests. I promise he is a real and serious politician. And definitely not a puppet for like 12 corporations and the United States and our proxy state of Israel. All right. This is what's going on here. Now, this is going to jump ahead a little bit, but I think it's still good for us to know. Far from cracking down on these ultra-nationalist militias, many of which display open signs of Nazism and fascism, Kolomoisky's actor-turned-president, Zelensky, has not only allowed them to act with impunity, but has also woven a tight relationship between his administration and open fascists. For instance, in November of 2021, Dmitry Yarosh, a former leader of Right Sector and avowed follower of Nazi collaborator Bandera, declared that he had been appointed as an advisor to the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine. Soon thereafter, Zelensky decorated Right Sector Commander Dmytro Kotsyobailo, with the distinction of Hero of Ukraine. On March 1st of this year, he appointed Maxim Marchenko, former commander of the Aidar Battalion, which is accused of war crimes in the Donbas, as the regional administrator of Odessa. There are numerous other ties between the Ukrainian government and military on the one hand, and these ultra-nationalist and fascist militias on the other. While they've been busy empowering fascists, Ukrainian authorities also stripped communist parties of their right to participate in elections in 2015 and issued controversial decommunization laws. So again, when leftists are like, I support the Ukrainian government, it's like they do not support you. Like they literally made it illegal to have your politics there. The laws banned the display of Soviet symbols and changed the status of the May 9th holiday, marking the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. The laws effectively remove all mention of the Great Patriotic War, which is the Soviet term for World War II, and replace it with Second World War, ban the Soviet victory flag, and rename streets, squares, and even whole cities. Tens of thousands of streets have since been renamed, along with nearly 1,000 cities and villages. Over 2,000 statues and monuments have also been removed in the expansive anti-communist cultural project. Now remember, they had, by many estimates, the highest number of casualties during the Holocaust in Ukraine, and they were liberated by the Red Army of the USSR from the Nazis, from Nazi occupation. What they're doing is they are getting rid of all evidence that the USSR saved them from the Holocaust. So that's what they're doing, okay? They're tearing down monuments. There are monuments that were named after war heroes who gave their life to defend the Ukrainian people from the Holocaust just because they came from the USSR Army. Okay? So very, very wild. According to Abdul Rahman, Zelensky's reluctance to take on right-wing groups the same way he's targeting allegedly pro-Russian groups is a sign of their influence in setting the political discourse in the country. Yeah. Either the conflict was actually realpolitik and game theory applies. It sounds like you're saying that the ideology is still relevant in the post-end of Israel. I mean, yeah, anti-communization, exactly. That's the thing. When I say that communists are an oppressed political class, people think that's deranged to say, but we are an oppressed political class, and anti-communist ideology does get people killed. It really does get people killed, you know? There is there's some realpolitik, right? Like, there's a reason why the United States let China cook. It's because we probably didn't understand communism enough as a country to understand they didn't stop being communist when the Dengist reforms went through, and we were short-sighted, and we're like, we can make money, right? But a lot of this stuff is ideologically driven still. It is. It very much is. But ideology also inspires material. Why is Ukraine so anti-communist, right? Well, because communism is bad for money, bad for profit. Why are the right sector and these neo-Nazi battalion groups in Ukraine anti-communist? Well, for them it is ideology. They want to build a master white race. They are not, they don't really care about money. They want to build a Ukrainian white Ukraine. So both of these things are factoring in, and they find themselves happy bedfellows, right? They find themselves happy friends in that regard. They're helping each other make money and make white people. And that's what ends up occurring, right? So, they have been a number of important symbolic gestures that glorify ultranationalists and Nazi collaborators, thereby fostering a broader culture of fascism within certain sectors of Ukrainian society. Zelensky claimed in an interview, for instance, there are indisputable heroes. Stepan Bandera is a hero for certain parts of Ukraine, and this is a normal and cool thing. That's the Nazi. He was one of those who defended the freedom of Ukraine. Zelensky, that's the Nazi. It's the Nazi who slaughtered minority and ethnic minority children. So, Zelensky also publicly defended Ukrainian footballer Roman Zozulya as a true patriot when he was accused of being a Nazi due to his photos with Nazi collaborator Bandera and his open support of the Azov battalion, the Nazi battalion. Moreover, Zelensky's former prime minister, Honcharuk, appeared on stage at a neo-Nazi concert organized by the fascist C-14 movement. Choo-choo, we have hype chest, hype train, yay! It is perhaps not surprising then that Ukraine was the only country, along with the United States, which voted against the UN General Assembly's draft resolution combating the glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and other practices that contribute to fueling contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. The only two countries that voted against combating the glorification of Nazism were the United States and Ukraine. All right? In the UN. Okay? So, just these people who are like, no, there's not Nazi problem in Ukraine. They're fucking delusional. They're kookballs, okay? They are literally, this is what I mean. They are like QAnon level conspiracy theorists, right? So just remember that. And a lot of them don't know. They don't know. It's Russian propaganda. It's a fucking UN resolution. How is that Russian propaganda, right? No, I did not see that Jenna Ortega is dating a neo-Nazi. Interesting. Wild. So, important media outlets have broadcast Nazi propaganda, which resound throughout the broader culture. In 2014, a Ukrainian journalist openly called for genocide in the Donbas region, claiming that, quote, there was a certain category of people that must be exterminated. On March 13th of this year, this was 2022, Ukrainian TV presenter Sharafamal issued an impassioned call for genocide and slaughter of Russian children on a morning show. With a photo of the notorious Nazi Adolf Eichmann behind him, he said, "I allow myself to quote Adolf Eichmann, who said that in order to destroy a nation, you must destroy first of all its children. Because if you kill their parents, the children will grow up and take revenge. By killing children, they will never grow up and the nation will disappear." This is just a casual fucking TV presenter on channel 24 of Ukrainian TV just saying this shit, okay? So just a reminder. And when I get the chance to take out Russians, he went on, "I will definitely do it. Since you call me a Nazi, I adhere to the doctrine of Adolf Eichmann, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that you and your children never live on this earth. You have to understand that it's about the victory of the Ukrainian people, not about peace. We need victory. And if we have to slaughter all of your families, I will be the first one to do it." This is the peace-loving victims of Ukraine, okay? All right, so, Channel 24 is part of the TRK Lux media conglomerate that is controlled by wealthy Ukrainian businesswoman Katerina Kitsadova and her husband, Andrei Sadovyi, the mayor of Lviv and former leader of the Self-Reliance political party. Okay. Zelensky has recently used the Russian invasion as a pretext to ban 11 political parties, including the largest opposition party that holds 43 seats in parliament, while having communist leaders arrested. Can you imagine if North Korea was doing this? I just want to put that out there. Alleging to fight against Russian misinformation, he also took control of news outlets, imposed a centralized information policy that combines all national TV channels into a single information platform of strategic communication. Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs is working directly with International Network of Public Relations Firms to wage information warfare and control the narrative. According to a senior NATO official, they are really excellent in StratCom, media, info ops, and psyops. So that is what they are good at, just like Israel, right? Yeah, but can you imagine if all of a sudden North Korea started doing all this shit, trying to ethnically cleanse people from their borders and work on TV quoting Hitler and shit? That would never happen, obviously, because they're communists and they're ideologically opposed to fascism. What not having theory will do to a motherfucker, obviously. But can you imagine what the West would say about that? Right? Can you imagine if Russia was doing all this, right? So, it's absolutely wild. Zelensky has used this. Yes, okay. So Zelensky's experience as a career actor has certainly been an asset in these endeavors. After all, he seeks to depict his government as free and democratic, not unlike Western imperialist powers it's aligned with, while it supports fascist militias, receives funding from reactionary capitalists who also fund Nazi battalions, glorifies ultra-nationalists and Nazi collaborators, emboldens a culture of fascism, bans political parties, and tightly controls news and information. So they talk about how this is international, a bunch of people are coming in, and that's a little bit less relevant to us today. So, that is the overview. Now, what we have next is just collective found footage that's posted on YouTube of people experiencing the Euromaidan.
Discussions about events on the ground.
So this is an hour long. So this is on my resource document. I recommend you guys watch it. We're not going to be able to watch it all. It's just found footage presented to give you kind of an understanding of what it's like. We'll skip through it a bit just so you get a little preview of it. Okay. Oh yeah, you remember when the IOF tried to portray Palestinians to be fans of Hitler by placing Mein Kampf in children's bedrooms? Exactly. These people are just fucking insane. But that's the kind of shit that Ukraine's doing. That's why Ukraine is so good at controlling the narrative. But just like Israel, you can't hold on to a narrative based on lies forever. And that's actually something, because I rewatched Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang, one of the defectors being interviewed was like, lies fall apart. Like, our government in North Korea tells us the truth about the world, about it, about our strengths, our failures, whatever. But all these Western countries, their countries are built on lies, and you can't hold on to a lie forever. Eventually, it comes apart. So I think that's what's going to ultimately happen with Ukraine, just like it happened with Israel. So I'll skim through this really fast for us.
It's union. We want our courts not to be corrupted. We want to be free. I know that maybe tomorrow we will have no phone, no internet connection, and we will be alone here. And maybe policemen will murder us one after another when it will be dark here. That's why I ask you now to help us. We have this freedom inside our hearts. We have this freedom in our minds. And now I ask you to build this freedom in our country. You can help us only by telling this story to your friends, only by sharing this video. Please share it. Speak to your friends, speak to your family, speak to your government, and show that you support us.
Well, Ukraine geographically, it's right in the middle of a crossroads between two economic superpowers. We have to the west the 28 member states of the European Union and all the promises of trade that they bring. But to the east is mighty Russia. Long cultural ties it has with Ukraine. It also, of course, has abundant gas supplies. Ukraine itself divided. Everyone, well, pretty much everyone is bilingual, but those in the western part, they speak Ukrainian first, and they certainly feel closer to Europe. Those in the east, they speak Russian. They see Russia as their natural neighbour. President Viktor Yanukovych, he was voted in predominantly by the Russian speakers in the east. The protests, of course, they began when the president decided not to sign a partnership deal with the European Union in November.
On Hereshkova Street. The protesters are shooting fireworks now towards the police. It's like a post-apocalyptic nightmare down here. It's insane. So the protesters have opened up a corridor on the steps in front of the building. The police inside have surrendered, so they're going to let them out and then retake Ukraine House.
The next day, Ukraine House was firmly under the control of the protesters.
On the front line, there is a so-called right sector, and they are of these a little bit violent organizations.
Right. So you have paramilitary organization with military experience on the front lines of the Euromaidan protests.
Yes, but I don't think the main factor in the whole right sector.
Sure. Okay, okay.
Конфликт здесь гораздо глубже.
To actively seek that peaceful transition, and it requires the opposition and those on the streets to recognize that violence is not going to be the path by which this issue will be resolved.
So just to clarify what this is, for anybody who wants to watch the whole thing, and I do recommend you do, this is the Euromaidan protest. It's a coup. And a lot of the people you see with guns, if you look at the patches on their arms, they have Wolf Single patches on them. You know, they're wearing Nazi insignia. These are fascists trying to overthrow the government of Ukraine because the government of Ukraine did a trade deal with Russia instead of the EU. And it's a civil war basically that broke out in many ways. It wasn't really a civil war at this point yet. It was more the Nazis, the fascists, against the Ukrainian government, because the Ukrainian government they perceived as being too Russian because of this basically trade deal. Yeah, we'll do a little bit. We'll just run through it really, really fast. Yeah, just so everybody knows, that's what this is video footage of that's occurring. And this is what they call the protest, but it was a coup. And ultimately, the fascists were successful and they seized control of the government. This was in 2013, 2014. And the United States encouraged all this. So while Barack Obama is on the news being like, we need a peaceful resolution, we armed and trained these guys. Like, we actually don't care about that. So I'm just going to scroll through. You can kind of see there's a lot of footage of the protest, the coup as it's happening. And imagine what it's like to just be an average Ukrainian at this time and your country's getting taken over by these fascists.
But the most organised and perhaps the most effective were a small number of far-right groups. When it came to confrontations with the police, it was often the nationalists who were the loudest and the most violent.
Did you guys catch the writing on his little shield? Did you guys catch the SS and Nazi insignia that he's written on there? Yeah, it's pretty bad to be an average Ukrainian. You'll be attacked if you disagreed. Exactly. There's video footage, too, if you go through a lot of these, where older women were like, we didn't think they'd hurt us. We're grandmas. And they did. They came and they attacked us for not agreeing with them. Yeah.
A group calling itself the Right Sector is perhaps the largest. Its members can be seen marching around Kiev in columns of about a dozen. Mostly they carry baseball bats.
So also when we tell American liberals, Western liberals, you're supporting the MAGA movement of other countries when you support the Ukrainian government. Imagine if January 6th won. This is what we're talking about. This was their January 6th, only they won. Right? So that's kind of what's going on here. And this is what this whole video gets into. So I encourage you to watch this. This is on the resource doc. It's very informative. And this is about the Euromaidan. So that's 2013, 2014. So basically, we go from the United States backing a color revolution in 2004 to then kind of losing power a little bit in the region. After that, they have an election and a guy who's voted in who's more aligned with the Russian half of the country, the ethnically Russian half of the country, right? And then these neo-Nazis and the ethnically less Russian, more Ukrainian, and more European aligned, they have this uprising, this coup against the country. That's what we're looking at. Now, so we've read some far left perspective, like an actual left-wing perspective. Now we're going to read a far right perspective on this, okay? And today we are going to skip map, everybody. Sorry, I think it's just important. 10 years later, Maidan's missing history. This is from Responsible Statecraft. They are that's a right-wing org, okay? Far right. So Zelensky has called the Maidan the first victory in Ukraine's fight for independence, but what was it really about? Now, these aren't far right like Nazi. These are far right like libertarian here in the United States. So they're like ultra Republicans who actually oppose U.S. military spending because they think it's like a waste of money or something like that. Yeah, that's what's going on. So the revolutionary violence that swept Kiev's Maidan Square on the night of February 21st, 2014, the coup, unleashes the forces of Ukrainian nationalism and ultimately Russian revanchism that resulted in, amongst other things, the first full-scale land war in Europe since 1945. President Zelensky has called the Maidan the first victory in Ukraine's fight for independence from Russia. They were already independent from Russia. Yet too often lost in the tributes to Ukraine's revolution of dignity, that's what they call the coup, are two simple, though ramifying questions. What was the Maidan really about, and did things have to turn out this way? Revisiting the events of that time may help us more fully understand how we arrived at this fateful moment in world affairs. So what precipitated the Maidan Revolution? In November 2013, Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych rejected the terms of an EU association agreement in favor of a $15 billion credit agreement offered by the Russian Federation. Many in the western part of Ukraine had supported the EU deal, as it would have, in their view, secured Ukraine's future within Europe. But as the Americans, Europeans, Ukrainians, and Russians knew full well, the association agreement with Brussels wasn't merely a trade deal. Section 2.3 of the EU-Ukraine Association Agenda would have required the signatories to, quote, take measures to foster military cooperation and cooperation of technical character between the EU and Ukraine, and encourage and facilitate direct cooperation on concrete activities jointly identified both sides between relevant Ukrainian institutions and bodies such as the European Defense Agency, etc., etc. So in other words, the trade deal also included the encouragement of military interoperability. Oh, I've never actually seen that word written out. Interoperability. It's kind of an awkward word. With forces viewed rightly or wrongly by the Russian government as a threat to Russian national security. In addition, the EU association agenda required Ukraine to put up barriers to trade with Russia. An alternative proposal put forward by Romano Prodi, former Italian Prime Minister and EU Commissioner President, would have allowed Ukraine to trade with both Russia and the EU, but was rejected by Brussels. Yanukovych's rejection of the EU agreement brought thousands of protesters to Maidan Square. Yet policy disagreements over issues of trade and national security can and are routinely adjudicated via democratic procedures, as they are in the US and Europe. And such an adjudication was eminently possible, even as late as the morning of February 21st, 2014, when a deal brokered by Russia and the EU was struck between Yanukovych and the Ukrainian opposition that included a revision of Ukraine's constitution, the creation of a unity government, and an early presidential election to be held 10 months later in December 2014. But on the night of February 21st, Yanukovych fled, and a new government was installed by voluntarist rather than democratic means. The immediate post-Maidan government included the far-right Svoboda Party. And so this is what they'll try to say, it's not, everything was done legally. I'm sorry, this man fleeing for his life, and he fled to Russia for safety because he's like, they're going to kill me. That's not a normal transition of power. That's a coup. You got cooed, right? Your government got cooed. I'm so sorry, my pronunciations. So the immediate post-Maidan government included the far-right Svoboda Party, whose members, according to a contemporaneous Reuters report, held 5 senior roles in Ukraine's new government, including the post of deputy prime minister. Edmund Wilson once wrote that it is all too easy to idolize a social upheaval which takes place in some other country than one's own. And that was a trap into which the Obama administration, along with almost the entirety of the American media, intelligentsia, and think tank world, fell in the immediate aftermath of Maidan. Right? They idealized this coup. It would be fair of critics of this view, and there are many, to ask, what were their alternatives to the Obama administration's support for the Maidan and Kiev's post-revolutionary government? Mr. Obama might have said, a deal was struck, stick to it. And again, because this is a far-right group, they're positioning this as a critique of Obama. But it's also worth noting, Republican Senator John McCain flew out and was there present with the Maidan protesters, with the far-right groups, standing on stage with them, handing out food and cookies and like helping them. So this was a bipartisan issue. They're not going to tell you that because they're a far-right org, right? They're going to be like, Obama bad. No, this is the United States did this, right? But they're saying, Mr. Obama might have said, a deal was struck, stick to it. This would have required a degree of statesmanship unusual to any American president. But Eurasia Group President Ian Bremmer observed only a month later, there was a deal that was cut with European foreign ministers. That deal was abrogated, and the Americans were very happy to jump on that immediately in ways which would have been completely unacceptable to anyone in the U.S. administration if we had been on the other side. And so the U.S. lent its support to the post-Maidan government and the anti-terrorist operation launched in April 2014 against the largely, but of course far from entirely, indigenous uprising in the Donbass. And it was an indigenous uprising, right? People try to claim Russia did this, but no. Even right-wingers are like, those were actually the people of the Donbass region rising up against this fascist government. And if you saw what the coup looked like, you could see being terrified of these people taking over your country, right? Thus began the first phase of the war, which lasted until the evening of February 24th, 2022, and cost 14,000 dead and 1.5 million refugees. This is all before the war started. So when people talk to you about, well, Russia just invaded Ukraine out of nowhere in 2022, if they don't know all this leading up to it, they're not qualified to talk about this with you. Kiev also pursued a policy of decommunization in the east, later cited by Putin as among his many grievances with the post-Maidan Kiev, and repeatedly refused to implement the Minsk Accords. As a former U.S. ambassador to the USSR, Jack F. Matlock noted in Responsible Statecraft, that's their publication, the war might have been prevented, probably would have been prevented, if Ukraine had been willing to abide by the Minsk Agreement, recognize the Donbass as an autonomous entity within Ukraine, avoid NATO military advisors, and pledge not to enter NATO. So when we talk about how this war could have been avoided, it could have been avoided if Ukraine had just done a few things differently. right? But it's not presented that way to us in the West. It's presented as though Russia's requests were completely unreasonable. They were very reasonable standard national security requests, and Ukraine could have done any number of things very easily to avoid going to war with Russia. Russia was willing to negotiate, and they didn't expect much. Don't expand into NATO, and just recognize the independence of the separatist movement of these people who don't want to be a part of your country anymore, and there'll be a buffer between us and you for safety. But Ukraine wouldn't do that. So this is what I mean when I'm like, only one side tried to negotiate to end this war, and it wasn't Ukraine. So the second phase of the war opened on the evening of February 24th, 2022. This is when Russia officially invaded Ukraine. And obviously, it's been really bad since then. We don't need to get into details about that right now, but we will later. So those were a far left and far right perspective, right? Now, let's get into the Black Agenda Report's writing on this. This is a Black Western perspective on this war. When did the Ukraine war begin? The conflict in Ukraine did not start in February 2022. Its roots go back to the 2014 U.S. coup against the elected president of that country. So this is news commentary and analysis, obviously, from the Black left. So this is Black left perspective. Viewing the Ukraine war as starting with the current Russian invasion leads to very different conclusions, and if you consider the starting point of this war was the 2014 U.S. orchestrated coup in Ukraine. The coup, which had elements of an authentic popular revolt, has been used by outside powers to pursue geopolitical ends. The conception that the war started on February 24th of this year, this came out in 2022, is like viewing the invasion by the U.S. and its allies in Normandy of June 1944 against the sovereign and democratic French as the start of World War II. Never mind that the Vichy government was a puppet of the Nazis, that the opportunities to negotiate had long been rejected, that the war had been raging for years, and that the only option for stopping the Nazis was militarily. NATO, it should be understood, is an army in the service of U.S. empire. Viewing it simply as an alliance of nominally sovereign entities obscures that it is commanded as a tool of U.S. foreign policy, and its stated quest of world dominion, that is, quote, full spectrum dominance. So we're just talking about what NATO is. So NATO stampeding towards the borders of the Russian Federation, adding 14 new members of former USSR republics and allies leading up to this. Even before the 2014 coup, the U.S.'s fateful decision in 2006 to draw Ukraine into NATO posed an existential threat to Russia. By December 2021, according to Realpolitik international relations scholar John Mersheimer, a U.S.-armed Ukraine had become de facto member of NATO, crossing a red line for Russia. Mearsheimer concludes the West bears primary responsibility for what is happening today. So similarly, if you're not able to understand the role the United States played in the Russia and Ukraine war, you're not qualified to speak about it, right? We did this on purpose. We did this intentionally, and we fostered all the elements there that would lead to these kind of uprising, this coup. We wanted this to happen. This was our plan all along. Mershi, Vicky, Vichy, and Mershi. Mersheimer and Vichy. I learn. So speaking before the UN on March 2nd, the Venezuelan representative identified the breach of the Minsk protocols with the encouragement of the US as the precursor to the present crisis in Ukraine. After the 2014 coup in Ukraine, the Minsk protocols were an attempt at a peaceful settlement through a ceasefire, withdrawal, and heavy weapons from the front lines, release of prisoners of war, constitutional reform in Ukraine, granting self-governance to certain areas of Donbass, and restoring control of the state border to the Ukrainian government. So basically what happens, again, a coup happens, Nazi-backed forces gain power of the country. Now, they hate the ethnic Russians, and there's a whole area of Ukraine that's ethnically Russian, right? So they're like, oh, fuck, we would like to leave Ukraine. This is bad for us. And so Crimea asked to be led into Russia. That referendum passes. The Donbass, ultimately, the decision is they're going to be independent, and they're going to become their own two countries, I believe, two separate countries. So the Donbass region is that area that was like, get us out of here. All right, so that's what's going on. So when we say self-governance to areas of the Donbass, that's what we're talking about, okay? I think she's behind me. She was in here for a minute. I don't know where she is right now. She'll come though. So this is what was going on, and this didn't really happen. So upsides of the war for the United States and downsides for everyone else. So who profits off this war? Ultimately, it's us. It's the United States. War is a great diversion for Joe Biden, whose popularity had been slipping due to lackluster domestic performance. The U.S. empire has much to gain, further unifying NATO under U.S. dominion and reducing Russian economic competition in the European energy market. A lot of this deal that was signed, that was the basis for this, was coming from natural gas issues. justifying increasing the U.S. war budget and facilitating sales of war material to NATO vassals. NATO has dumped over $1 trillion in arms and facilities into the border countries next to Russia and continues to this day to pour lethal weapons into Ukraine. The leader of Ukraine's neo-Nazi C-14 recently bragged on YouTube, "We are being given so much weaponry, not because, as some say, the West is helping us, not because it is best for us, but because we perform the tasks set by the West. Because we have fun. We have fun killing." More than 14,000 people have been killed in eastern Ukraine region of Donbass in warfare between ethnic Russians and Ukrainian regular military right-wing paramilitaries in the 8 years since the coup. The self-proclaimed People's Republic of Donetsk and Luhansk, beleaguered enclaves in the Donbass of largely ethnic Russians, seceded from Ukraine and were recognized by Russia on February 21st. The semi-governmental, over 80% U.S. government-funded, RAND Corporation's playbook for the U.S. and its allies says it all: pursue across economic, political, and military areas to stress, overextend, and unbalance Russia's economy and armed forces and the regime's political standing at home and abroad. So this was kind of our goal. So it's difficult to think what other options Russia has to defend itself. Perhaps there are some, but surely they are slim. It should be clear that the U.S. has continually been the aggressor, even if some do not agree with the Russian response. As Phyllis Bennis with the Institute for Policy Studies argues, the U.S. provoked this war. So I agree with this. This is my take on this exactly, right? So, I can show Hummus Guzzler's deleted option. I don't know what that means. I don't speak French. Fuck. So the peaceful integration of Russia with the rest of Europe would have been a great threat to the U.S. empire. A unified or even cordial Europe could truly herald the end of U.S. hegemony. The long-game geopolitical goal of preventing the unification of Europe may well be the fundamental aim of U.S. foreign policy in the continent. What would become of U.S. strategic interests if peace talks were to break out in Europe and Russia were to become partners with Germany, France, and Italy? A potentially more independent Europe, including Russia, would challenge the U.S.-dominated Atlanticist project, which is really important to talk about. The U.S. doesn't want Europe and Russia to be friends. That continent must be divided for the United States to have any real hegemony, right? The same way we oppose a Pan-Africanist movement, we would oppose a Pan-Eurasian movement, right? Similarly. So this goes on to talk about spheres of influence, the borders of Ukraine, how half of the people in Ukraine think of themselves more as Russian and half think of themselves more as Ukraine or European aligned. And that's important to note. There's not one international community, etc. So that's what goes on in the rest of this article. Now, let's get into the center-left perspective from Jacobin. A U.S.-backed, far-right-led revolution in Ukraine helped bring us to the brink of war. In 2014 Ukraine, great power gamesmanship, righteous anger at a corrupt status quo, and opportunistic far-right extremists toppled the government in the Maidan Revolution. Today's crisis in Ukraine cannot be understood without understanding Maidan. This is the coup. So Russia trying to join NATO could have led to EU, which was a challenge to like a bigger, exactly. They call it a revolution. You'll see the difference in how all these different places report based on their political perspective. It's quite interesting. But you look at the things they have in common. This war could have been avoided. The United States is to blame for a lot of this. There are Nazi elements and elements that are extremely far right wing there that are difficult for the EU to work with, because as right wing as the EU is, they have a whole thing about the Nazis from World War II, and they really don't fuck with that specifically, right? The Nazi iconography specifically, they're like, oh, no, you can't do that. You can do white supremacy like a normal person, but you can't do this whole Nazi thing, right? They're not center-left. Yeah, I struggle to position Jacobin, if I'm being perfectly honest. I don't know how to position them politically. They smeared Chris Smalls while defending Nazis in Ukraine, and I really don't know what to do with Jacobin politically. So use your judgment. This is not like what I would consider a left-wing news publication, but they're also further left than mainstream Western media. So how a centrist. My first guess was centrist. I don't know. Something like that. So this is kind of my position. So I don't know how you guys want to position Jacobin, but take that in mind. So they're saying it's January. A defiant crowd of protesters, a jumble of bodies where far-right extremists rub shoulders with everyday people, wants the head of the elected president. They chant anti-government slogans, occupying government buildings, and carry arms, some of them makeshift melee weapons, some of them hunting rifles and Kalashnikovs. By the time it's all said and done, the demonstrations will lead to the death and hospitalization of both protesters and police. It's not the Capitol riot in Washington that so horrified Americans and foreign observers in 2021. This was the Ukrainian Maidan Revolution, or Euromaidan, which right around this time 8 years ago actually succeeded in toppling the country's elected government, sending then-President Viktor Yanukovych fleeing for his life to neighboring Russia. They're compatible left. That makes sense, yeah. Nearly a decade on, the 2014 Revolution of Dignity... Oh, I gotta charge my light. This stream would be nothing without this light. All of our success and reaching the masses comes from this light, comrades. We need it. We need it. Nearly a decade on, the 2014 Revolution of Dignity, as it's known in Ukraine, remains one of the most widely misunderstood episodes of recent history. This I agree with. Yet understanding it is critical to understanding the ongoing standoff with Ukraine, which can largely be traced back to this polarizing event, depending on who you ask, an inspiring liberal revolution or a far-right coup d'etat. So like today's Russia-NATO tensions more broadly, at the heart of the Maidan protests was the push by some Western governments, especially the US, to isolate Russia by supporting the integration of peripheral parts of the former Soviet Union into European and Atlantic institutions, and Moscow's pushback against what it saw as an encroachment of their sphere of influence. Drop the link to the light. I got it on eBay. It was the cheapest light I could find. So it's not even, I don't even think it's a special light. I'm so sorry. This could have made me TikTok shop millions. In 2014, the man forced to navigate these tensions, Viktor Yanukovych, was taking his second crack at the Ukrainian presidency. He had first been ousted after the 2004 Orange Revolution that followed widespread charges of vote rigging in the election that brought him to power. And that was, again, something we saw from last week. The United States was heavily involved in that. Before running again 6 years later, Yanukovych had worked to rebuild his reputation, becoming the country's most trusted politician. By 2010, oh my god, 100 stream streak, Magic Dealer. Yes, yes. By 2010, international monitors had declared the most recent election free and fair, an impressive display of democracy even. But once in power, Yanukovych's rule was again marred by widespread corruption, authoritarianism, Jacobin, and for some, an uncomfortable friendliness with Moscow, which had made no secret of its backing him in the previous election. The fact that Ukraine was starkly divided between a more Europe-friendly West and a West and center, and a more pro-Russia East, the same lines that largely dominated the election, only added to the complication. Yanukovych was in a tricky spot. Ukraine relied on cheap gas from Russia, but a plurality of the country, not crucially an absolute majority, still wanted European integration. His political career was caught in the same bind, with his party formerly allied to Putin's own United Russia Party. His pro-Russia base wanted to see closer relations with its neighbor. But the oligarchs were the real reason he'd gotten anywhere near the presidency, and they were financially entangled with the West, and they feared competition to their grip on the country from across the Russian border. So all the while, two geopolitical powers in the form of Washington and Moscow hope to use these cleavages to draw the country into their respective orbits. Now, what I will say is a little bit wrong here is that they already were in the orbit of Russia. They were next-door neighbors with Russia. The majority of Ukrainians saw, in 2009 even, the influence of Russia over their country as being positive. This wasn't really... They didn't need to draw them in. They were already buddies with Russia. They were chilling. Nearly a decade on. Okay, so 4 years. For 4 years, Yanukovych towed a fine line. He pleased his base with symbolic and cultural measures, like talk of unity or cooperation with Moscow in key industries, even if much of it went nowhere, along with more serious steps like making Russian an official language, rejecting NATO membership, and reversing his pro-Western predecessor's move to glorify Nazi collaborators as national heroes in school curricula. I don't think Yanukovych did a pretty good job. I think Yanukovych was the most reasonable, rational person he could be in his position, short of being a Marxist-Leninist and being on the right side of history. I think he did pretty well. I think he was navigating a difficult situation the best he could, and he managed it pretty well. So he struck a deal letting the Russian Black Sea Fleet use Crimea as a base until 2042 in exchange for discounted Russian gas. And this ended up leading to fistfights and smoke bombs in the Ukrainian parliament because it was so controversial. Yeah, U.S. is another target for a market for U.S.-aligned oil. Yeah. So people were saying he was a Kremlin puppet, blah, blah, blah. but he actually was pretty non-committal on joining on a lot of pro-Russia stuff. He was really trying to toe the line and keep his country together, and it didn't work. So I think again, he's not a Marxist-Leninist. He's obviously not got the same politics as me. But in terms of a dude in a capitalist world doing his best in an impossible situation put upon him by the United States mostly and the EU and NATO, I think the dude did a pretty good job with it. So he also, though, worked with and publicly encouraged Western involvement in updating Ukraine's natural gas infrastructure. He said European integration was the key priority for his foreign policy. Like, he was literally just trying to, like, okay, everything's going to be fine with it for a while. And obviously it wasn't fine. Brookings Institution described Yanukovych's foreign policy as more nuanced than his pro-Russian leanings had first suggested. I think it's true, but that's also what wound up sealing his fate. So Putin offered Yanukovych a no-strings-attached loan in the same size as the IMF's. So the IMF offered the loan, and Putin was like, well, just do the loan with us. And squeezed him into what amounted to a mini trade blockade. With the EU failing to offer anything that would match the catastrophic loss of trade with Russia that Ukraine was looking at, Yanukovych was like, obviously I should go with Moscow's offer. So he reneged on the EU deal, and that is what led to the protests that we saw video footage of that would ultimately become the coup. Now, axis of convenience. Let's see how much more I'm trying to get through. Okay, I'm going to try to get through the last two of this section before we end, so we might run a little bit late. So they're saying demonstrators were fed up with nepotism and corruption that pervaded Ukrainian society. One of Yanukovych's son is a dentist who ended up among the country's wealthiest men somehow. Another was an MP. They also said there was the increasingly authoritarian nature of Yanukovych's rule. I don't really know what that means. In fact, the other major sticking point for the deal was Europe's demand that Yanukovych, leading rival, be released from prison over trumped-up charges. He was like, I don't think these are trumped-up charges. I wonder if it was Tymoshenko. Tymoshenko was in prison during this time. She was the one that was like, my country's been cooed. She's such a character. You know, she makes it interesting. It was Tymoshenko, probably. Yeah, it was the one. There was a couple people. It wasn't just her who was in prison. It was somebody else too, but I wonder if that's Tymoshenko they're talking about. She's so interesting. I don't know why she fascinates me. There's something so dystopian about her. I love it. I mean, I don't, love her politics, but, as a character existing in the world, yeah. I don't know. Basically, everything he did made the situation worse. It's not like he did anything overtly wrong. It's just this was not a solution he could have resolved. And they say this here, as one Kiev resident told the press, if the deal is signed now, with Europe, I still won't leave the protest. It didn't matter. Protesters were chanting Ukraine is Europe. That's what was going on at this time, okay? So, Yanukovych's response only made the movement only further doomed him. He had a brutal crackdown, right? Then rammed through a set of oppressive anti-protest laws in January. I mean, you saw it. To call that a protest is... it wasn't exactly a protest. I mean, if you're the leader of the country, yeah, you're going to crack down on people trying to overthrow your government. That makes sense, right? So, righteous though their cause may have been, the Jacobin, the movement's critics had a point too. For one thing, the Maidan protests did not have majority support. Now, this is what's important to remember. They're going to tell you Maidan was a revolution, blah, blah, blah. It was a coup, and it did not have the majority of support from Ukraine. The way we talk about Ukraine a lot, too, the west and center of the country were more aligned with Europe, and the east was more aligned with Russia. That makes it sound like the people who are more aligned with Russia were a minority in the country. That's actually not true. The eastern part of the country actually includes the whole south of the country. The Maidan protests they did not have majority support in the country protests. Most of the protesters came from the west. It was one area of the region. And they had historically been ruled by other countries as late as 1939. And the Russian-speaking East, who had considered themselves more aligned with Russia since the 17th century, were like, this anti-Russia stuff that they've got going on over in the West is really concerning to us as Russian people, right? Living in Ukraine. We don't like that. Which to me, I try to think of this like, imagine like you're in Southern California, right, or any place in the United States that has a large Latino population, Mexican population in particular, and you've got a bunch of people running around lighting things on fire, attacking the government with a strong anti-Mexico thing. They're like, we hate Mexico. This president's got too much Mexico influence. Fuck Mexico. If you were Mexican American living in that region, you might be like, oh shit, this looks bad. This looks scary. And that's really what was going on. So, yeah, moral of the story, I love this. From Marxist Gamer Zero, the U.S. will try to kill you no matter what, so you might as well just go full communist. Yes, this is my position on third waveism. Yes, I agree. So, but yeah, this is really what was going on there, and they were really sketched out by it. Very, very obviously, it was horrible. So, as they were resorting to force, the increasing violence of those involved was key to their ultimate victory. Protesters fought with chains, sticks, stones, petrol bombs, bulldozers, firearms, all culminating in what was effectively an armed battle in February, which left 13 police officers and nearly 50 protesters dead. The police, quote, could no longer defend themselves from protesters' attacks, writes political scientist Sergei Kudelia, causing them to retreat and precipitating Yanukovych's exit. The driver of this violence was largely the Ukrainian far right, which, while a minority of protesters, served out as some kind of revolutionary right-wing vanguard. Look, so the right's got a vanguard party, so we need a vanguard party, right? Looking outside Kiev, a systematic analysis of more than 3,000 Maidan protests found that members of the far-right Svoboda party, whose leader once complained that Ukraine was run by, quote, a Muscovite Jewish mafia, and which includes a politician who admires Joseph Goebbels, were the most active agents in the protests. Okay, and again, this is a coup. These are members of the government. These are politicians who've been on the fringes of the government, but they have a political party. They're a political force within Ukraine. It is a coup. It's not just like the masses. Remember, this did not even have popular support. They were also more likely to take part in violent actions than any group but one, Right Sector, a collection of far-right activists that traces its lineage to genocidal Nazi collaborators. Yes, Maoish. That's what it is. Something like that. Fascism. So Svoboda used its considerable resources, which included thousands of ideologically committed activists, party coffers, and the power and prominence afforded to it as a parliamentary party, to mobilize and keep the protests alive, while eventually leading the occupation of key government buildings in both Kiev and the western regions. This was particularly the case in the western city of Lviv, where protesters took over a regional administration building that soon came to be partially controlled and guarded by far-right paramilitaries. There, they declared a People's Council that, quote, proclaimed the Svoboda-dominated local councils and their executive committees the only legitimate bodies in the region. So their supposed People's Council declared that the only legitimate bodies in the region were the far-right neo-Nazis, right? So this was written by Volodymyr Ishchenko, fueling the crisis of legitimacy that ended in Yanukovych's ouster. So Right Sector also led the January 19th attacks on police in Kiev that even opposition leaders criticized. One protester said the far-right bloc had breathed new life into these protests, though. And Andrei Pryby, the unofficial commander of Maidan, founded the Social National Party of Ukraine, a barely even winking allusion to Nazism that later became Svoboda. By January 2014, even NBC was admitting that right-wing militia-type toughs are now one of the strongest factions leading Ukraine's protests. What was meant to be revolutionary for democracy and liberal values ended up featuring ultra-nationalist chants from the 1930s and prominent displays of fascist and white supremacist symbols, including the American Confederate flag. So when we tell you the 2013-2014 coup was if January 6th won, we are not lying. They are literally walking around with American Confederate flags, okay? It's crazy. It's honestly insane. So their flags, this is footage. This is that guy, Stepan Bandera. Remember him from last week. This is just some photo footage of what's going on with these guys. And they talk about this in here. Yeah, they've got Nazi flags, Confederate flags, etc. So, Yarosh from the Right Sector, one of those far-right groups, had urged compatriots in 2009 to start an armed struggle against the regime of internal occupation and Moscow's empire. As early as March 2013, Trizub, one of the organizations that formed Right Sector, had called for the Ukrainian opposition to move, quote, from a peaceful demonstration into a street revolutionary plain. One enduring mystery of the Maidan Revolution is who was behind the February 20 sniper killings that set off the final, most bloody stage of protest, with accusations against everyone from government forces to the Kremlin to U.S.-backed mercenaries. I will say this is a USA move. We've done this before. We did this in Venezuela against Hugo Chavez. We planted guys in key positions as snipers to start shooting into crowds of protesters to turn it into a bloody demonstration that would lead to an all-out coup so we could take control. So this is out of the U.S. playbook. That doesn't mean the U.S. necessarily did this, but it is not a stretch to guess that the U.S. did it because we have a track record of doing this. Okay? Before Crimea, everybody got real weird about, you can't call it the Ukraine. It's called Kyiv, and it's Czechia, not Czech Republic. Do we need to worry about Prague? Are people doing something like that with language policing of Prague? Yeah, Tiananmen, same thing. Exactly. I didn't know where they were doing that with Prague. Am I saying Prague now? Am I going to get canceled by Prague? Great. So without precluding these possibilities, there's now considerable evidence that the same far-right forces who piggybacked on the protester cause were also at least among the forces firing that night. At the time, men resembling protesters had been witnessed shooting from protester-controlled buildings in the capital, and multiple Maidan medics had said the bullet wounds in police and protesters looks to have come from the same weapon. A Maidan protester later admitted to killing 2 officers and wounding others on the day, and crates of empty Kalashnikov bullets were found in the protester-occupied Ukraina hotel. The same place a decorated military pilot and anti-Russian resistance hero later said she had seen an opposition MP leading snipers to. The government's investigation, meanwhile, which focused only on the protest murders, started out filled with serious flaws in investigations. So, the majority of wounded protesters testify they saw snipers in protester-controlled buildings or were shot by bullets coming from their direction. So basically, protesters were shot, and they say that they were shot by their own side, right? So, yes. That's what's going on. So Yanukovych tried to resolve this peacefully. It didn't happen. And one protester in Lviv said, if I was Yanukovych, I would try to flee the country. Otherwise, he'll end up like Gaddafi, who was raped to death with a bayonet. Or with a life sentence or the electric chair. He will not leave the country alive. So when we talk about Yanukovych leaving, he left under threat of being raped to death with a bayonet, basically, by protesters. This is what happened, and that is how the coup happened. So this is what's going on. Now, external actors have always played an important role in shaping and supporting civil society in Ukraine, according to Ukrainian scholar Irina Solonenko in 2015, pointing to the EU and the United States through agencies like the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID, whose Kiev headquarters were in the same compound as the U.S. Embassy. One can argue that without this external support, which has been the major source of funding for Ukrainian civil society since independence, Ukrainian civil society would not have become what it is now. This was the case in the 2004-2005 Orange Revolution, where foreign NGOs changed little about Ukraine's corruption and authoritarianism, they love that word, Jacobin, but achieved the crucial goal of nudging Ukraine's foreign policy westward. As the Liberal Center for American Progress put it that year, did Americans meddle in the internal affairs of Ukraine? Yes. The American agents of influence would prefer different languages to describe their activities: democratic assistance, democracy promotion, civil society support, etc. But their work, however labeled, seeks to influence political change in Ukraine. U.S. officials, unhappy with the scuttled EU deal, saw a similar chance in the Maidan protests. Just 2 months before they broke out, the Ned's then president, pointing to Yanukovych's European outreach, wrote that, quote, the opportunities are considerable and there are important ways Washington could help. In practice, this meant funding groups like New Citizen, which the Financial Times reported played a big role in getting the protest up and running, led by pro-EU opposition figures. Journalist Mark Ames discovered the organization received hundreds of thousands of dollars from U.S. democracy promotion initiatives. Washington took an even more direct role once the turmoil started. Senators John McCain and Chris Murphy met with Svoboda's fascist leader, standing shoulder to shoulder with him as they announced their support to the protesters. So again, this was a U.S.-backed coup. John McCain went to Ukraine and stood on stage with a man accused of being an anti-Semitic neo-Nazi. And we'll learn more about this next week. Okay, there they are together. U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland handed out sandwiches to the Nazis. To understand the provocative nature of such moves, you need to only remember that the establishment outrage existed over the mere idea Moscow had used troll farms to voice support for Black Lives Matter protests. Later, a leaked phone call showed Nuland and U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine maneuvering to shape the post-Maidan government, Fuck the EU, Nuland told him, over its less aggressive intervention into the country. Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, she said, referring to opposition leader Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who backed the devastating neoliberal policies demanded by the West. You can probably guess who became prime minister in the post-Maidan interim government. It was Yatsenyuk. It was exactly who Nuland said should be. It's an overstatement to say, as some critics have charged, that Washington orchestrated the Maidan uprising. I don't think it is. Jacobin thinks it is. I think they are wrong. I think that's some editorializing. I disagree. But there's no doubt U.S. officials backed and exploited it for their own ends. I do think we orchestrated this and have been orchestrating it, as made evident from the first text that we read together, the Russ Bellant book, since the end of World War II. So much as in 2004, the outcome of the Maidan Revolution, the no fault of the majority of well-meaning, frustrated Ukrainians who helped drive Yanukovych out, Jacobin, was neither peace and stability nor a move towards liberal values and democracy. Almost all of the protesters' demands have gone unfulfilled. The same far right that led the charge in toppling Yanukovych found themselves with plum roles in the interim government that followed. The winner of the 2014 snap presidential election was Ukraine's seventh richest man, Petro Poroshenko, who had a history of corruption. His interior minister incorporated a neo-Nazi militia, the Azov Regiment, into Ukraine's National Guard, with the country now a mecca for far-right extremists around the world. And this is something we kind of skipped over, but in the fighting, far-right extremists from all around the world came to Ukraine to join in on the fight, to promote and bolster the Nazi politics specifically. They came to learn and get training from Azov, including, ironically, Russian white supremacists who were hounded from their country by Putin. So even the Jacobin is like Russian white supremacists who went to Ukraine to help them fight because Putin made them leave, right? So Putin, yes, Russia has a white supremacy, neo-Nazi problem as well. Putin forced them out. And where did they go? Ukraine. Okay? So even Jacobin is saying this. Yeah, Dookie butt. These rich guys don't seem cool at all. Exactly. Despite far-right parties ultimately losing seats in parliament, ultra-nationalist movements successfully shifted the country's politics to the extreme right, with Poroshenko and other centrists backing measures to marginalize the speaking of Russian and glorify Nazi collaborators. Even so, far-right candidates have entered parliament on non-far-right tickets, and extremists like former Azov commander Andrei Belitsky have taken high-ranking law enforcement positions. While far-right vigilantism spread through the country, Poroshenko himself granted citizenship to a Belarusian neo-Nazi and engaged in anti-Semitism of his own. Little to nothing has changed about Ukrainian corruption or authoritarianism under either Poroshenko or current President Zelensky. Each is governed like an autocrat, using their powers to go after political opponents and weaken dissent, and have been embroiled in personal enrichment scandals that remain endemic to the Ukrainian political class. Not that it stopped either from being vetted by Washington and flooded with American support. Okay, so Ukraine's been embroiled in mini civil war since Maidan, after Putin moved to secure the Crimean naval base from NATO control using Russian military presence, and they are calling it a dubious referendum. It's weird to call it a dubious referendum. Everyone pretty much agrees this was an overwhelmingly real result. Putin's Human Rights Council, they're claiming in Forbes, accidentally post real Crimean election results. You know, I don't know. People were celebrating in the streets. There was no massive counter-protest movement in Crimea to fight about this. It's just kind of wild. So even with that, what they think is the real reports in Crimea, according to various indicators, 50 to 60% voted for unification with Russia, with a voter turnout of around 30 to 50%. So even if this was true, I'm sorry, we'll say low end 30% of people who felt motivated enough to show up to the election, the majority of them still voted in favor of it, and that's if that was true. So who knows if that's real or what. Most people agree, though, there hasn't been a huge counter-protest movement in Crimea. There's not a bunch of people in Crimea who are like, no, we want to go back to Ukraine, please help us. It's just kind of silly to say that, right? We got Raiders. Hi, Verlo Raiders. Hello. We're just going a little late today on our deep dive into Russia, Ukraine. That's what it is. Yeah, the Crimeans are... And so even the report that people think is the leaked, real version of the numbers still shows that the majority of people who voted in favor of it. And they're like, but only 30% of people came. Well, I don't know what to tell you. We have notoriously low voter turnout in the United States for referendums, too. All sorts of shit. Like, they're the ones who felt motivated to go vote either in favor or not in favor. Maybe the rest were like, I don't know. We'll see what happens. And this is what's hard for people to understand. The majority of people are not ideologues. They just want to not have their lives ruined. That's it. Right? Whatever's not going to ruin their life, they're going to go with. And the majority of people are not ideologues. So this is what's kind of going on. For most Western observers, they say, and again, this is Jacobin, so I guess we're going to call it centrist, a centrist position. Well-documented facts for Western observers have been pushed to a simplistic black and white narrative or cast as misinformation and propaganda, like the crucial role the far right played in the revolution. In truth, they say the Maidan Revolution remains a messy event that isn't easy to categorize and is far from easy compared to what Western audiences have been led to believe. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about with this is this Brookings piece. So Brookings is pretty capitalist conservative-y institute as well. This is when Ukraine set the course for Europe, the Revolution of Dignity a decade later. So this is written in 2024, looking back on the Maidan coup. Is it a poll? Do you guys have a poll? Can a tank twerk? You didn't poll. Somebody needs to make a poll for that. So let's see what they have to say looking back on Maidan. November 2013 seemed like an unlikely time for another Ukrainian revolution. 9 years had passed since the Orange Revolution, a massive wave of popular protests against a massively rigged presidential election, achieving inspiring success. In 2004, hundreds of thousands of protesters filled Kiev's central Independence Square, drowning the city in orange, the presidential candidate color of Viktor Yushchenko, right? Remember, this was the first one we talked about last week. Tank does a front flip. I think it can also twerk. If a tank can have titties, it can have an ass. That's true. That's so true. So this was the Orange Revolution, right, from 2004. This person's talking about their personal experience. So they said in November 2004, I was in my kitchen in a small town in southern Maine making applesauce when NPR reported about the swelling numbers on the Maidan. I dropped in, and Maidan is called that because it's just the name of a square. They renamed it like some bullshit name now. Liberation Square, Freedom Square, some super America core name. I don't remember what it's called, but it was always called Maidan. I dropped in applesauce and called a friend in Washington, D.C., another Ukrainian from Lviv. In a week, we were on a flight to Kiev, me with my 9-month-old daughter and she with her 2 toddlers. Our mothers met us in Kiev to pick our kids up and take them to Lviv, and we stayed on the Maidan. Why were we there? What was the use of flying from the United States to stand daily on the Maidan for a month in December cold, where among thousands, one person made no difference? For one, while the political aims were serious and legitimate, the Orange Revolution transpired in an atmosphere of jubilation. Thousands in orange paraphernalia filled the Maidan, many traveling from other cities or returning from abroad like I did. For me, it proved the ultimate reunion with friends I hadn't seen in years. A stage was promptly elected, and Ukraine's best performers took turns entertaining and rallying the crowds. The Orange Revolution was Woodstock for democracy. Okay, yeah, this is pretty right-wing. All right. 2024 article, yeah. But the real reason we were on the Maidan was we believed each one of us could make a difference. In fact, to be there was to partake in a sense of collective agency, to contribute to safeguarding Ukraine's fragile democracy, which was not only our right, but our obligation. Okay, so they're talking about this. Whatever, they're talking about some anti-communism, blah, 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 whatever. And then, the fate of post-Soviet Ukraine was not dissimilar from the fate of post-Soviet Russia, though, a mutant system grown out of an unreformed Soviet legacy and the most ruthless exigencies of unchecked capitalism. So, for anybody who doesn't know this, the destruction of the USSR, the dismantling, was one of the most violent things that's happened outside of wartime, like ever in recorded history. It saw the largest drop in life expectancy, like ever recorded. It was really, really bad for people. So what they're talking about here, the author is saying the exact same thing as this. Just like, yeah, so I hated communism in Ukraine. I don't even think they were old enough to understand communism in Ukraine, but whatever. But they were like, but the transition to capitalism was way worse, in the early 2000s, the West hailed Putin as a pragmatist and an architect of stability and order badly needed in Russia, ravaged by the democratic chaos of the 1990s. Oh, there she is. That's my girl. Look at her. I could tell by her earrings. I don't need facial recognition with this bitch. Maybe that's why I like her so much. She's so kooky. I always can spot her. Timoshenko. My little weirdo. I think of her the same way I think of Donald Trump in the U.S. The braid, the earrings, like, I know her. So, all right, they're talking about this. Let's get to where it's relevant to us. Tymoshenko, she's always running for things, whatever. Okay. So early in 2013, my family and I moved to Ukraine for 6 months so that I could complete fieldwork on my PhD dissertation about Ukraine's nuclear disarmament. This was the longest continuous time I spent in my home country in 13 years, and in my hometown of Lviv in 20 years. Since leaving Ukraine in 2000, I'd become a veritable global nomad, with stints of various lengths in London, Almaty, Prague, Baku, Maine, and finally Budapest, where I enrolled in a doctoral program at Central European University, since expelled by Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, a Putin admirer to Vienna. I knew nothing about nuclear weapons, but I knew for certain that whatever I was to research and write would have to be about Ukraine. Cultural competency, yes, but also that darn inculcated sense of civic duty to contribute to Ukraine somehow, even if I bailed on building it in situ. It's no secret that living in a place is very different from watching it from a distance or visiting for holidays or revolutions. To a visitor, Lviv transformed immensely, getting a handsome facelift of its Renaissance downtown, brimming with cafes, bookstores, and fashion boutiques. There were supermarkets, DIY stores, IMAX cinemas. Kiev was in a different league altogether, awash in nouveau riche money. It was alleged to have the greatest number of Bentleys per capita of any European capital. Yanukovych himself was rumored to live in an ostentatious palace outside of Kiev, featuring a private zoo, a floating galleon of a reception hall, and golden toilets. Meanwhile, anything that relied on state funding, such as education, medical services, and public agencies and works, remains in an embarrassingly pitiful state. Babe, that's capitalism. That's capitalism. I was astonished by how little had changed since I was a schoolgirl back in the Soviet days. Yeah, capitalism's not going to fix anything for you. The Soviets built something for you, and you complained about it. And then capitalism isn't building shit now. That's capitalism. You're not going to get improvements under capitalism to your fucking infrastructure and schools. Is that a joke? So they're talking about how the economy of Ukraine was not doing well in the post-Soviet world. Yeah, duh. People do not do well when they transition from communism to capitalism. God forbid anybody fucking acknowledge that, right? So then they talk about the conditions for this. For the Ukrainian students on the Maidan, though, we're talking about this. Europe was about the future. Europe was about not having to pay bribes to petty bureaucrats. You just have lobbying instead. It's a more formalized bribery process, actually. It was about going on an Erasmus exchange to another European university. It was about crossing Schengen borders without visas. It was about not being run over by a Bentley whose driver would go unpunished. I think Europeans in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong, that could still happen to you. It was about living with clean air and drinkable water, about recycling and picking up dog poop. It was about public funds channeled towards public goods, not into private pockets. In short, Europe was about the freedom of choice and living in dignity. Whatever. So the students come together and they start yelling slogans like Ukraine is Europe. The Maidan became Euro Maidan. Right? At 4 a.m. on November 30th, it's looking as if the protest might fizzle out. With only a few hundred still encamped on the Maidan, the Berkut riot police, armed with tear gas and truncheons, moved in and began dispersing the protesters by force. Dozens of students were beaten, some ended up in hospitals. And some took refuge a short distance from the Maidan in a monastery that had been rebuilt by Yanukovych's former patron, Kuchma. As the morning of November 30th dawned, the fog of events was still thick. One thing, however, was clear. That night, something critically important shifted in Ukraine. A Yale historian wrote in her book, The Ukrainian Night, Yanukovych had broken an unspoken social contract. In the 2 decades since independence, the government had never used this kind of violence against its own citizens. So this is when the student-driven Euromaidan protests began their transformation into the nationwide Revolution of Dignity. That's what they call it, right? So, this is a German sociologist and political thinker famously defined the state as possessing monopoly on the use of legitimate force, and the events in Ukraine in the winter of 2013-2014 turned Weber's definition on its head. The use of violence on the Maidan, authorized by Yanukovych as the head of state, turned a huge portion of the Ukrainian society against him and ultimately cost him his legitimacy as a president. Matthew Broderick killed 2 people in Dublin and got a $150 fine? What? Okay, confirmed. Becoming European will not save you from a rich guy killing you with little consequence. Okay? Alright. Scrolling the pop-up. Did I miss something? I do have to make the spray bottle still. It's on my to-do list. All right, so then hundreds of thousands of people came out, and this is when we saw the Nazis get involved and really take control over it. Blah, blah, blah. This person's writing is really annoying to me, but whatever. The Maidan citizens were Ukrainian and Russian speakers from all walks of life and every ethnic background. They were not united by language, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, but by a commitment to share civic values. They were united by geographic location, though, right? So they're saying that there was a flash mob in Odessa, a Russian-speaking Ukrainian port city with prominent Jewish heritage, where musicians of its famous Philharmonic Orchestra, led by a Venezuelan conductor, sprung up and did a flash mob. This is like some liberal protest stuff, whatever. And they're talking about how there was more attempts to disperse the protests, blah, 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 blah. And here we go. So, again, a lot of this denies the fact, though, that once the Nazis got involved in this, things got really violent. It wasn't just like some peaceful student protesters, right? So by the time the Revolution of Dignity, the coup, started in November 2013, I moved back to the same small town in Maine where I met the Orange Revolution. I was a PhD student with 3 kids in elementary school, 1 chapter of my dissertation half written. No work on the dissertation would be accomplished through the winter of 2014. I spent all of my time glued to the computer following daily developments of Maidan. I watched the event unfold. This is no Woodstock. Okay. So, something more ominous was in the air. Reports emerged of disappearances and the torture of Maidan activists. Some of them snatched from hospital beds. The Maidan screens. This was no Woodstock. The Berkut riot police received orders to clean up the Maidan and move in force. Images of a wall of shields and police helmets, water cannons, black smoke, men in orange hard hats with Molotov cocktails, sullen volunteers in makeshift hospital treating gory wounds from live bullets and stun grenades were transmitted around the world. By February 20th, some protesters were being picked off by snipers installed on nearby rooftops. When the smoke of the Battle of Maidan cleared, over 1,000 were injured, 108 protesters and 13 police were dead. From then on, fallen protesters would be honored as the Heavenly 100, the first casualties in the struggle for Ukraine's European future. It was an unthinkable toll for society and that treated the beating of students as an unacceptable red line. The slaughter on the Maidan was a step too far even for Yanukovych's own political party, which moved to distance itself from the man who now had blood on his hands. But again, remember, this was in response to what we already just read, right? About how all of the right-wingers and the Nazis had shown up with guns and were really turning this into like a violent altercation. So they're saying now Russia's heavy dark shadow hung over the ordeal because of this deal, very obvious, blah, blah, blah. So Russia portrayed the events in Ukraine as an illegitimate fascist coup. That's true. And so what they're saying now, this is this like weirdo Americana perspective, the Kremlin did so stealthily, sending little green men to take over Crimea, which would promptly and illegally annex now. Then more brazenly mobilizing and arming proxies to instigate a war on the Donbass that would claim over 10,000 lives, and finally dropping all pretense with an overt large-scale invasion. Putin, loath to accept his impotence in Ukraine, would go on to violate her. So I just really want to share all this perspective here. So this is the very like pro-Americana perspective. This is the liberal perspective. This is the liberal perspective. And the reason why I include this is I want people to understand, like, this is the perspective of a woman who does not live in Ukraine, who lives in the United States, who thought that a protest movement should be like Woodstock, who was a child during the USSR but was convinced it was bad, even as she is acknowledging that the post-USSR government was worse, and who is ignoring and downplaying the role of the Nazi movement there, and is taking away the agency and legitimacy of the people of Crimea, and saying because there was a flash mob of musicians in Crimea that supported them, clearly everything was illegitimate. So this is the liberal perspective. So this support for the Ukraine war is not something that conservatives have. It's not something that the left has. It's something that is specifically a liberal institution, right? This is a liberal institutional support, right? So this is why this is kind of included here. All right, Ukrainians would go on to mount a valiant resistance to Russian onslaught, blah, 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 blah. But even she's acknowledging, well, you know, Ukrainians wanted to be Europe. Why? Why? Because of rock and roll and blue jeans. And that's really what she's acknowledging here. So this text is included for the communists, right? We know. She's saying, well, we wanted to go to fancy colleges and not have to show our visas when we traveled internationally. You know, and that was her motivation, right? This vague idea of what Europe is. She doesn't even fucking live in Ukraine anymore. But it's just this idea, right? This idea of what Western democracy is. And I think it's interesting how her account of it, I should go in and label like how all the different groups actually. Her account of it is so different than the other accounts we've read, right? And that's why we ended with hers. This woman. So her account is something so different than everybody else's. It's like delusional at this point, right? So young people no longer hail from a country known only for its corruption. They hail from a country known for its valor, from a country where ordinary people are wresting in an unequal battle their freedom from a vicious foreign tyrant. These young Ukrainians will no longer awkwardly linger on the threshold of Europe, waiting to be admitted. They are part of the polity that says the highest price to defend everything Europe stands for. And like me, when I see a New Hampshire license plate, they now know what live free or die truly means. That's it. That's the final. That's the final document in here. It's fucking batshit insane. So I end with that in this section to understand all of the different perspectives on this, right? I'm going to label it actually in our document. I'm doing it all. Because I think it's useful. And then we'll do a little small Q&A before I have to start work. I'm cutting into my lunch hour. It's okay though. I'll eat fast today. I have a little bit more time, so I'm not doing the election volunteer work anymore. Yeah, it's really inconvenient having to show my passport, so it's fine to overthrow the government. Exactly. Oh yeah, no, this is, I really think it's batshit insane though, that perspective. All right. Okay, so I updated it. Your wholesome meme. Okay, let's like. It is convenient. It is convenient. I know it's convenient. As an American, I get blue passport privilege even without being a member of different places. Oh my god. Wait, is that Coney in the background? Am I looking at Coney? Is that no, what's the name of the ape? The ape one. Coney was the guy. Who was the name of the... What was the ape thing? I'm mixing up all the memes. Harambe! It was the same era. Coney was the psyop the CIA did about the man. Harambe was... What was up with him? What was his story again? These were the same time. When was Harambe? 2016. So 2012 to 2016 was the era of these psyops. Tits out for Harambe. Coney was 2012. Harambe was 2016. He got shot. The gorilla got shot. They shot Harambe to save a human child. And what was the Coney one? Okay, these were two different social phenomenons that I just associate with an era of time where I listened to a lot of psych rock. I do remember one of my friends was really into the Coney thing. And I was like, I don't know if this is real. But I don't remember what it was. That was fucked. Harambe was murdered because a child fell into the enclosure. That is kind of fucked up. Coney was child soldiers. So both involved children. So you gotta give me a break on that a little bit. They both were the same era and involved children of some kind. And Coney was a CIA psyop, and Harambe was shot because of a baby. And people sided with Harambe instead of the baby. People were more pro-Harambe than the baby? Okay, Coney 2012 was a warlord in Africa that turned out to be a financial donation scam, but was all about child soldiers. Harambe was a zoo animal. Did the zoo animal try to maul the baby? He wasn't even hurting the kid, and they wouldn't release the full footage of it to hide how bad it really was. Okay, all right. So we do not support Coney, but we do support Harambe. He was dragging the kid around. Harambe protect. Okay. I'm rehashing 2016 internet drama because I didn't recognize him. I did not either. He was chilling. Do I need to look it up? I don't want to see him die. I don't want to see anybody die. Well, people are really upset about this. They built statues honoring him and stuff. He was in Cincinnati? Okay. Interesting. Uh-huh. Okay. All right. So that's who this is, Harambe. Harambe 2016. Kony 2012. Very different. Both involve children in very different ways. They kind of involve misplaced acts of harm used in defense of children that may or may not have needed it. So really, we can bring it full circle, similar to Ukraine, where that white lady thought it was a good idea to stage a whole ass coup because she thought it would be cool if people cleaned up dog poop more. So similar. Really similar to connecting it back to Ukraine. And that's, I'm guessing that's Zelensky in the middle, right, of the meme that we're looking at. I know Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Yeah, she said that in the thing. She was like, I just wanted a world where we picked up dog poop like Europe. She's crazy. Okay, liberals really, really, really cared about it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That is him, right? That's Zelensky in the middle. So I'm not the only one. These are all great social trends united under neoliberalism. I know. I'm really bad at recognizing faces, guys. I have to use so many context clues. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, easy. We don't have a lot of ladies who wear the robes. So she's a lady in the robe and she's the right age. So that I'm like, that's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I know that one. Okay. There's a tank flipping. They were both before COVID, which means that's all the same thing. Yeah. That is true. See, so I wasn't the only one making the connection. The meme maker made the connection for us. T'Challa. I'm watching it sound off. I have sound off. Wow. What movie is this? I need to watch this. Zelensky was actually the child that killed Harambe. Really? Yeah, the baby kind of had a hand in it. This movie's great. Yeah, this is this the guy, somebody said from Black Panther? The one who was objectively correct? Or is he the one that was actually, who is this? Sisu, about a Finnish dude fighting communists. Oh, unfortunately. Is he the Black Panther or the one that was the better one that was unfairly maligned in the Black Panther story in support of a neoliberal pacifist agenda? So this one's the Black Panther. And then there was another guy who was the real hero of Black Panther, but nobody seemed to understand. He died of cancer. It's very sad. So Michael B. Jordan, yes, Michael, and I remember everybody thought Michael B. Jordan was really hot. And he had the good politics in the movie. He was like, fuck this, fuck that museum, fuck these people, we're never going to get liberation this way. And I'm like, yeah. And then everyone's like, no, he's the bad guy, actually. So yes, this actually makes sense. Harambe, this is a great meme. Harambe, I have questions about. I feel like Kony would have been better in here, honestly. Because it would have been like all neoliberal trend gestures at vague compliance with the status quo, right? Killmonger. Killmonger was the good one. Yes. Yes, this is what I think. I think we should remake this meme. Harambe doesn't deserve to be here. He seems like Harambe is a real hero. These are fake heroes sold to us to pacify us. So really, it wouldn't be Kony in here. It would be whatever, I'm analyzing the meme, whoever accepted the money on behalf of defeating Kony. Where did the money go? Where did all the libs scammed money go to? How did that work? To 2012. This should just be the number 2012. That's crazy that they did that to Killmonger. Okay, he was correct objectively. His politics were way better. All right, that's all I'm saying. Yeah, I have so many questions. Dude who made the documentary. Oh, he went nuts, walked around naked on bath salts, and was masturbating in the streets. Who made the movie? We need that guy in there. They give us false idols. Yep. Mm-hmm. The White House is claiming Harambe? They're coming out radically anti-baby? Wow. A patriot from 2020. Do they think Harambe was a victim of woke? A true patriot. I don't know that Harambe was a patriot. Are they saying Harambe was MAGA? Okay, I know I have to go, but this is so interesting to me. Anti-woke left lets baby die. I feel like, yeah, I'm surprised by this from a branding perspective. That's amazing. Okay, I didn't realize that Harambe was a patriot. I didn't realize Harambe was an American name, if I'm being perfectly honest. I didn't know that was an American name. Yeah. Harambe has a lot of lore. I missed all of this. Yeah, I need to know, because that's an era where I was partying a lot. I was having a lot of fun. I was really touching grass that era. You know, some people say partying, they mean they struggle with substance abuse issues. I did not struggle with substance abuse issues, but I was having a lot of fun. Like, I was really doing my social life hardcore. You know what I mean? So I missed a lot. My Twitter at that time, notoriously empty. I was too busy. Okay, well, I'm learning. I'm sorry I mixed up Harambe and Coney. I didn't realize those two internet phenomenon were different things. I'm sure there's so much more to learn. These were our peak years. Malrich and I are the same age. These were our peak years. Yeah. Antifa woke child soldier mercilessly murders patriotic MAGA monkey. Exactly. Okay. I'm not yet. Are you the one that just sent this one about the oh no, that was Tits Out for Tankies, the Coney one. Which article is it that you're talking about? This article is really interesting for me. It ties into what we discussed with ex-Yugo countries being desperate to join the EU. A large aspect of it is that is a lot less developed capitalist countries like yours see having an EU passport as access to better education, better jobs, better overall material conditions and futures. Yes, a lot of Macedonians go above and beyond. Oh, you're talking about the woman, the dog poop woman, right? Yes, it's very, very interesting, right? Didn't you have a whole podcast episode about Coney 2012? Shit. I don't think so. Did I? I don't think I would have done the research for that one. I only remember if I do the research. Yeah. We're modless. No, that's okay. You're not spamming, Nadia. It is really interesting, though. That's why I included that. Because I'm like, this is the psychotic mindset of these people, right? They're like, yeah, stage a coup because I want to have Woodstock. And it's like their idea of a revolution is like pacified liberal BS, right? Oh, maybe when we talk about Sierra Leone. Yeah, that's probably it. It's Invisible Children. That's right. Yes, because Invisible Children did have a tie-in with a different thing that we talked about. I fucking remember this now. Yes, Invisible Children had a tie-in with a different political issue, and they also did the Coney thing. Yes. So Invisible Children. Make sure Coney gets in the paper. Yes. Okay. Invisible Children supports direct military intervention. Yup. Okay. Yep. Stop sending me Facebook invites. What a mess the internet was. What a mess. Yep, I did. I remember it. I remember it wasn't something about Africa. Yeah. Wild. Okay. All right, guys. Should I send you to Larry? Should we be done? Yeah, they're real psyopers. Yeah. It was like a whole government thing. That's totally right. Dare is weirdly connected to the murder of Fred Hampton. Fuck. Okay, that's interesting. All right. Bye, Big Echo. I'm gonna send you all to Larry. It's Juices Day. Have a blessed Juices Day to you all. Learn from me. Learn from me. Read Haley's Ultimate Sapphic Reading Guide video after Larry. It is Gay Wrath Month after all. So you are obligated to support our Sapphic community. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Tomorrow we'll be back to regularly scheduled programming. Bye. I forgot about Facebook dating. I was never a Facebook person. Thank God. Okay. Right now.